The Apothecary Diaries Volume 5. Prologue. Geez, how are you gonna survive if that's all it takes to send you running? The voice was friendly enough, but its owner was looking down at him where he was collapsed on his knees on the ground. He could see the youthful figure on the fence, holding an apple. The figure took a bite of the hard fruit with a flash of white teeth. Why? Thought the boy on the ground. He'd disappeared among the trees, eluded his pursuers, so why could this kid find him so easily? Shut up. I know that. Better go back, then. You've got the serving women crying. The youth chuckled. So it had come to this, being looked down upon from the lofty heights of the fence. It made him so mad. What about you? He wanted to ask. Wearing a commoner's outfit, clambering on the fence like a monkey, munching on an apple. Forget crying. If the serving women saw that, they would faint. It's an important job. Just do it already. Monkey jumped down off the fence and stood in front of him, then mussed his hair as if the kid had the right. Monkey was only a year older than him. He pushed the hand away, hating to be treated like a child. The other youth laughed and wiped the half-eaten apple on a sleeve, then held it out. Your leftovers. Hey, you don't have to eat it. There was a pause, then he grabbed the apple and bit into the side that didn't have any teeth marks in it. The crunchy fruit flooded his mouth with its flavor, simultaneously sweet and sour. He looked up to see the kid in the commoner's garb grinning at him. I want to at least choose my own partner, he said. Not likely. You get all the nicest stuff. What if you picked somebody awful? There would be a lot of unhappy people. She was older than my mother. Yeah, I don't know what to say about that, Monkey said shyly, looking genuinely unsure. He knew that. Yes, even he knew that much. But he was still a child, so acceptance didn't come easily. Grow up, Monkey said. You're one to talk. You're only a year older than me. What, you think that makes you a grown-up? He wanted to ask. Did it mean Monkey would be able to go calmly along with a match like that? All right, fine. I've decided, he said. Decided what? He raised his finger, then pointed directly at the faux commoner. My partner for tonight. Excuse me. A sardonic smile, meant to hide embarrassment. Chapter 1, Locusts. Morning was a lazy time in the pleasure district. These caged birds had been singing till dawn, and when the customers finally went home, the obsequious masks came off. For the brief time until the sun was high in the sky, they would sleep like logs. Mau Mau left her little shack, yawning. In front of her, she could see steam rising from the verdigris house, the men servants working hard to ready the morning baths, most likely. The chilly air prickled her skin. The sun was late in rising. Her simple cotton overgarment wasn't enough to keep her warm, and she rubbed her hands together, her breath fogging in front of her. It had been a month since she'd left the rear palace, and the New Year's celebrations had subsided. Her old man had stayed at the palace, hence why Mau Mau was here in the pleasure quarter. Back in the shack, there was still a child sleeping, and Mau Mau resolved to leave him that way, knowing it was the only part of the day when he would be quiet. The boy's name was Zhou Yu. He was a survivor of the otherwise exterminated Shi clan, and currently he was living with Mau Mau. Long story. The little shit supposedly came from a decent background, but Mau Mau almost found herself wondering whether he was really a son of luxury. He was astonishingly adaptable, to the extent that he could lie there, snoring away, in that drafty old hovel. Oh yeah, Grams wanted to see me, Mau Mau thought. She could get some hot water from the verdigris house while she was at it. In weather like this, you couldn't go bathing in cold water. Shivering, Mau Mau stopped in front of the well and lowered the bucket, then started hauling it up again. When she arrived at the verdigris house, the courtesans had finished their baths and were having the apprentices dry their hair. Well, you're early today, said Mei Mei, her hair still glistening wet. She was one of the establishment's 3 princesses, and also effectively Mao Mao's older sister. The most prominent courtesans bathed first, so she was done already. "Oh, hey, sis. Do you know where Grams is? The old lady's talking with the owner over there." "Thanks." It was the elderly madam who ran the day-to-day affairs of the Verdigris house, but she didn't own the place. The man who did stopped by about once a month to confer with the madam about the brothel, the courtesans, and anything else that might be on his mind. The owner was a man just entering old age, and he was totally overawed by the madam, who had known him since he was young. In fact, a few gossips whispered that he was the child of the madam and the last owner, but nobody knew the truth. Running a brothel wasn't the man's only concern, he had other, more legitimate businesses as well, and at first glance he looked perfectly ordinary. He was such a soft touch that one wondered if he was really safe being a part of this world, and one worried for the brothel's affairs if the old madam should ever leave them. "He's not here with another of his bizarre business ideas, is he?" "Who can say?" Mei shrugged expansively. At that exact moment, the madam's voice boomed around the building, "You idiot! You complete, total, utter fool! What do you think you're doing?" The sisters looked at each other. "Guess you were right," Mei said. "Guess so. What was the man up to this time?" A few minutes later, the madam emerged from an inner room. The nearly elderly man, looking thoroughly cowed, followed her. Everyone called him Mr. Owner. It was the only way to remember who actually did own the place. Considering the way Mr. Owner was rubbing his head, it looked like he'd gotten a good rap from the madam's knuckles. "Oh, Mao, you're here," the madam said. "Yeah, Grams, I am. You asked me to come, remember?" "Yes, of course. Damn it, she forgot." Mao was sure she had only said the words to herself, yet the next instant, she felt knuckles smacking into the top of her head. Sometimes she wondered if the old lady wasn't actually a mountain spirit who could read minds. Mr. Owner gave Mao a look of sympathy. "He kind of reminds me of the quack." If she was having a little déjà vu, maybe it was because the two men actually looked somewhat similar. "I know that look. You want to take a bath? And have breakfast too, I suppose? Bring the kid with you. Someone's in a good mood." "I do have my days," the old woman said, then all but strutted over toward the kitchen. "I'll, show myself out, then," Mr. Owner said, and promptly did just that. Too bad, Mao thought, watching him go. He usually stays for breakfast. No one said a word. Everyone in the dining area was struck dumb. Finally Pyrin, sitting beside Mao, announced, "Awful." Her face was a scowl of disgust. She was considered one of the 3 most lovely flowers to bloom at the Verdigris house, but if any of her callers had seen her with that look on her face, all their fantasies would have been dashed. As for Mao, she looked like she'd found a maggot in her drinking water. The table was long enough to seat about 20 people, and everyone had a bowl full of congee, another of soup, and a third small bowl, while 3 large trays were placed at intervals along the table. At the Verdigris house, meals usually consisted of a single bowl of soup, and maybe, if you were lucky, a modest side dish. Today the small bowls contained raw fish and pickled vegetables, while 2 of the trays had separate side dishes in them, a very generous breakfast by normal standards. Something dark glinted on the trays. Bugs normally treated as pests in farmers' fields were here being served as food. Locusts. "Grams, can you explain this?" "Shut up and eat. It's a gift from Mr. Owner." Mao could well understand why the old lady was upset. Mr. Owner had other business concerns besides running this brothel, legitimate businesses that allowed him to hold his head high in polite company. But he could hardly be called a talented businessman. The harvest was bad this year. I guess they wept until he gave in. The madam angrily poured some black vinegar on her congee. Mr. Owner dealt in crops. Farmers in this nation gave part of their harvest as tax, and the state purchased another part of the yield. Mr. Owner's business involved trading in what was left. I don't care if they cried their eyes out. What was he thinking, letting the seller dictate the price? He won't be able to sell this stuff either. And look at it all. A mountain of fried locusts towered on the tray, seasoned as best as could be managed with soy paste and sugar. He said he'd bought too much, that they wouldn't keep and would go to waste. Then he ought to just throw it out, instead of using sugar on it. Sugar was expensive. And here he'd cooked bugs in it. Who was going to eat that? No one, that's who. That's why he had so many left over and how they had made their way to the verdigris house's table. Mr. Owner had considered eating the costs himself, so to speak, but he had another concern. He had a wife who didn't think highly of the verdigris lady's profession, and he had evidently chosen the madam's knuckle over his wife's rage. Mau Mau scratched the back of her neck. She was used to less than refined food, but even she wasn't eager when confronted with this mountain of insects. After 2 or 3 of them, she would be ready to declare herself full. And the courtesans, far less accustomed to such base fare, frowned openly and refused to even touch the bugs. Hurry up and eat. You won't shut up about wanting side dishes. Well, here you go. 5 each, eat up, the old woman growled. Everyone looked at each other, and finally the first pair of chopsticks reached out toward the large dish. Well, now. Mau Mau was surprised by the first person who put one of the locusts into their mouth. As they chewed on the bug, though, an unmistakable look of revulsion came over their face. It's not very good. It's kind of crunchy. Like it's empty. This unvarnished assessment was given in a high-pitched voice, for it belonged to Zhou Yu. Mau Mau had been sure that the young lordling with his pampered upbringing would have resisted the idea of ever putting such food in his mouth, but apparently that wasn't the case. Maybe the loss of his memories had taken any aristocratic inhibitions with it, or maybe he'd actually eaten something like this before. Or perhaps it was simply a child's adaptability at work. Wow, I'm amazed you can stomach that, said Pyrin, who was sitting beside Mau Mau. It's not great, but it's not like you can't eat it. It is super crunchy, though. Crunchy? That made some sense. You removed the innards of locusts before cooking them, so they were hollow on the inside. Hence Mau Mau really thought nothing of it as she reached for a locust and unenthusiastically took a bite. HRK. Yes, it was crunchy, all right. It seemed far more hollow on the inside than the locusts she'd had before, even though this one had been simmered. Maybe it was because the carapace was the only thing in her mouth, an outer layer even emptier than your average locust preparation. Zhou Yu was busy bargaining with Pyrin. You want me to eat yours? I'll help you out if you give me a mooncake. Mau Mau got a firm grip on his head and shoved him down in his seat. Ow! Oh, ow, ow, ow! Zhou Yu yelped. Mau Mau took one of the locusts in her chopsticks and glowered at it. It was her bad habit. Once something had gotten her interest, she simply couldn't let it go. I want you to do a little shopping for me. After breakfast was over, the madam finally remembered why she'd summoned Mau Mau in the first place. She wanted to send her on an errand to the market that occupied the city's central thoroughfare. The courtesans weren't allowed to leave the brothel, but the menfolk around here were too dense to trust with the shopping. There were a lot of strange and unusual products available at the market, but there were also a lot of con artists looking to rip you off. The market was a cheap place to sell things because one didn't need to maintain a storefront, but by the same token, there was nothing to identify the bad actors and places to stay away from. You had to have your wits about you to find worthwhile purchases. I want you to get some incense. The usual stuff, the old woman said. She meant the mild incense that was always burning in the entryway of the verdigris house. It was a consumable, so she wanted to get it as cheaply as possible, but she couldn't be burning low-quality stuff at the door to her establishment either. Yeah, sure. What's it worth to you? Mau Mau stuck out her hand, but the madam only smacked it away. Breakfast and bath water for 2 people. Sound fair? Damn stingy old hag, Mao Mao thought, but she went. Hey, Freckles. Buy me one of those. Absolutely not. Zhou Yu was pointing to a stall full of toys as Mao Mao hauled him away, pulling him by the sleeve. She'd fully intended to do the shopping alone, but the little shit had thrown himself on the ground and begged and tantrumed until, in the end, she'd had to take him. Now she was walking through the market, dragging him along. A single huge street cut through the center of the capital, carriages ran back and forth along it, and at the far end was the home of those who lived above the clouds, the palace. Every day, the street hosted a thriving market. To see the palace from here sometimes made Mao Mao feel as if she'd only dreamed that she had ever worked there. But the very fact that Zhou Yu was with her now was proof that she had lived within its walls, for that was why she'd found herself embroiled in the chain of events that had brought him to her. The Shi clan rebellion had impacted the market as well, to a point. The northern regions produced grain crops and timber products, and Mao Mao couldn't shake the sense that fewer places than usual were selling such things. Instead, she saw a lot of the dried fruits and textiles that came from the south and west. There was something else too, something that brought a scowl to Mao Mao's face when she saw it: simmered insects for sale. Locusts again. I guarantee that stuff sucks. Who would actually buy it? Zhou Yu said, causing Mao Mao to slap her hand over his mouth and drag him away, the stall owner glaring fearsomely at them as they went. What did I do? Zhou Yu demanded. It's true, isn't it? Just shut up, Mao Mao said, looking at him almost as grimly as the shopkeeper had. This, she thought, was why she hated children. Hollow shells like that are never going to be good. Then Zhou Yu said, more quietly, man, so much for the harvest this year. Mao Mao blinked. Wait. What did you say? That stuff's gonna suck. No, after that. Zhou Yu looked at her curiously. That the harvest is toast this year. Yes. How do you know that? How do I know that? Zhou Yu scratched his head with his right hand, his left hung limply at his side, spasming occasionally. For Zhou Yu had died once and come back to life, and it had left him partially paralyzed and without most of his memories. I don't remember. I just remember hearing that when the bugs are crunchy, it means the harvest will be bad. He held his head, humming thoughtfully. Mao Mao wondered if a good shake might bring something back, but he was technically on loan to her, so she didn't want to be too rough with him. If what Zhou Yu was saying was true, though, it could be a serious matter. She smacked him on the forehead, just hard enough to keep him from getting any stupider. He puffed out his cheeks in protest. You know, I think I might be able to remember, he said. Really? Mao Mao asked, and Zhou Yu quickly looked around at the nearby shops. Yeah. If you buy me something, I'll remember, he said, looking perfectly satisfied with himself. Mao Mao didn't say anything, but pulled the corners of Zhou Yu's mouth as far apart as they would go. In the dumb gap in his front teeth, a new tooth could just be seen coming in. Once a little shit, always a little shit, Mao Mao thought. Remember, my ass. Zhou Yu was drawing happily despite the lump on his head. To Mao Mao's surprise, he had wanted not some sort of toy, but paper and a brush. She'd agreed to let him use one of her brushes, but the paper had ended up being surprisingly expensive. Maybe something of his decent upbringing remained with him, because he could tell the difference between low-grade paper and the fancy stuff. He'd gone around the shop, mumbling, "This is no good," and "That's no good," until he found the most expensive paper on display. Of course, Mao Mao wasn't about to let him boss her around like that, and instead picked something which, although not as nice, was perfectly usable. Paper was expensive for a consumable, but not impossibly so. She hoped that as it became more common, it would also get cheaper. Zhou Yu looked so happy clutching his sheaf of paper that she decided to forgive him with just a single knuckle to the head. Zhou Yu had been drawing busily since they'd gotten back to the Verdigris house. He was in the shop with Mao Mao, where she was busy making the abortifacients and cold medicines she'd been asked for. She'd been told to keep him close so he wouldn't cause trouble for the apprentices, some of whom were about his age, or the courtesans. When she came back from delivering the medicines to a nearby brothel, she discovered a crowd at the entrance to the verdigrease house. Courtesans, apprentices, and even some of the men servants were there. What's going on? She wondered, squinting to see better, whereupon she discovered that the crowd had formed around her obnoxious brat. Wondering what he had done this time, she hurried over to him, the crowd parting until she was standing in front of the little shit. She discovered a piece of white paper with lines dancing across it. Don't cut, Freckles. You have to wait in line like everyone else. What are you doing? Joyu was sitting with a flat board in lieu of a table, drawing a picture. In front of him, a courtesan sat in a chair, looking as calm and composed as she could. Can't you tell? I'm drawing a picture. The brush ran fluidly over the page, producing something resembling the woman in the chair, if more beautiful. There. All done. Joyu left the brush in the pot of ink and gave the paper a few good shakes. The face of his model broke into a smile and she said, "Well, now," as she pulled out her wallet and gave him 5 coins and not small ones. "Pleasure doing business," Joyu said, tucking the money into the folds of his robe. The sum was considerably more than some kids' pocket change. "Ooh, I'm next," one of the men servants said, sitting in the chair. Wasn't he supposed to be on guard duty or something? What was he doing playing around here? If the madam saw him, he'd be in for it. "Ah, sorry, mister. I'm all out of paper. I'm gonna go buy some more right now, though, so stop by tomorrow, okay?" "Bullshit. I've been waiting all day." "Really sorry, sir. I'll do you first thing tomorrow. I'll make you look extra manly." He was pretty good at this. Joyu slipped away from the crowd and started hurrying toward the paper shop. Mao Mao recalled buying him a sheaf of 10 sheets and it was already gone. At least 3 of the people standing around appeared to be holding portraits, at his prices, that would already be enough to recoup the investment in materials. Who knew he had a talent like that? Mao Mao thought, scratching the back of her neck and stealing a peek at the page a nearby courtesan was holding. "You louts! What are you doing?" The sound of the madam's raspy voice was enough to banish the burble of friendly chatter and turn all the faces pale. "Hurry and start getting the place ready. You want the customers to run away." There was the madam, brandishing a broom. The courtesans and apprentices and men servants scattered like baby spiders. Mao Mao was about to make tracks for her own place when she was grabbed by a skeletal hand. "What is it, Grams? You know damn well what it is. It's that kid. You might have agreed to take him in and you might be getting a stipend to support him, but you can't just let him do whatever he wants. You're the one getting all the money, Grams." Yes, for some reason it was the old lady who kept all the funds that came in. It had something to do with the fact that Joyu was, to an extent, given free rein of the verdigrease house. But a man, even a child, couldn't be allowed to actually live in the brothel, yet neither could he be housed in the men servants' longhouse. By process of elimination, he was put up in Mao Mao's shack. "He's using my facilities. He owes me a cut of the profits. I'll let it go at 10%. Greedy old hag." Mao Mao didn't think she'd said the words out loud, yet mysteriously, she found a knuckle cracking down on her head. "You, clean up that brush and ink pot." "Why me? Don't question me. Just do it. Or it's locust soup tomorrow." "Hag." Mao Mao thought, but she sullenly began to clean up, pressing one hand to her head all the while. When Joyu got back to their shack that evening, Mao Mao looked at him in a way that showed she was not pleased. "Freckles, where's my brush? No brushes for boys who don't clean up after themselves." Mao Mao pointedly turned her back on him and put some wood in the cook stove. "Don't be stingy with me. If I'm stingy, I learned it from the madam. Mao Mao stirred the congee in the clay pot on the stove, tasting a sip of it. She concluded it was a little bland and added some salt. Who, by the way, says she's going to charge you for using her place? I know. I'm gonna do my portraits somewhere else from now on. That caused Mao Mao to frown. She perched the ladle in the soup pot, then went over and stood in front of Zhou Yu, who was lounging on the rush mat on the floor. She crouched down and looked at him. What? You stay close to the verdigris house. I don't care if she charges you for it. You're not to get too far away from the guards. And no more going by yourself to buy paper. Hey, I can do what I want. He tried to look pointedly away from her, but Mao Mao grabbed his head and forced him to look in her eyes. Yes, you can do what you want. If you don't mind ending up as a lump of meat. Lump of meat? Zhou Yu looked at her. She wasn't joking. The verdigris house was boisterous and friendly, but this was still the pleasure district, and the seamy underbelly of the capital was always near at hand. Mao Mao pointed out the window of the shack. You'll end up with the likes of her. The light of a lantern could be seen almost floating through the evening darkness. It was held by a woman, who was hooded and carrying a rush mat. She looked ordinary at first. But then Zhou Yu caught his breath and stood abruptly. He must have noticed that this night walker had no nose. She had no proper home, either, but could only take customers by the roadside. Women like her, the lowest of the whores, were often physically ravaged by sexual diseases. The woman outside didn't look long for this world, but if she wanted her next meal, she would have to find a man to service. What was she doing around here? Maybe Mao Mao's old man, good-hearted as he was, had given her medicine once, or maybe she was looking for the leftovers from some other brothel. Whatever it was, Mao Mao thought, it was causing trouble for her. This isn't a nice place, she said. It doesn't matter if you're some little kid. There are people out there who would line up to kill you if they knew you had a few coins. In other words, if he didn't want to die, he would do as she said. Zhou Yu pursed his lips a little, but nodded, his eyes brimming with tears. You understand? Then hurry up and eat your dinner and go to bed. Mao Mao went back and stood in front of the stove again, where she resumed stirring the congee. Zhou Yu was already up when Mao Mao woke the next morning. She could hear him bustling around, and looked up to discover the tabletop covered in paper. Zhou Yu was working his brush vigorously. That little shit! He was using the brush and ink pot she'd hidden from him. Mao Mao got up, about to give him a taste of her knuckle, when one of the pages came drifting down off the table. Curious, she picked it up. It showed a bug drawn in precise detail. In fact, it was almost too real, it made her a little squeamish to look at. Brings back memories. It made her think of the young serving woman No, the consort who had loved insects. That young woman, Shisui, had done drawings like this too. Mao Mao felt a pang at the thought. Suddenly, Zhou Yu stood up. Done, he said, presenting her with a piece of paper. I finished, Freckles. Finished what? This. Right here. He fluttered the paper at her, looking downright proud of himself. It showed two subtly different bugs. I had a little trouble remembering exactly, but I think this is it. I think this is what I saw with the thing that talked about bad harvests. Luckily, his pictures spoke far more articulately than he did, they were very clear. This is your normal locust. And here on the bottom is a locust from when there's going to be a bad harvest. The two locusts showed legs of different lengths, and although it was hard to tell in an ink drawing, the richness of their coloration might have been different too. Are you sure about this? Pretty sure. It sort of came to me in bits and pieces. Zhou Yu was still largely amnesiac, but apparently he was recovering bits of his memory. That could be highly inconvenient depending on what he remembered, but it might prove very important too. Two types of locust. Mao Mao would have to find out more about this. A plague of insects could destroy an entire nation when they ate all its crops. Insects were always a threat to crops, but plague was something else altogether. The bugs would devour anything and everything. In bad cases, they might even eat hempen ropes and straw sandals. Mao Mao didn't know what caused such events, but they happened at least every few decades. By good luck, no such thing had occurred since the accession of the current emperor. Some people insisted this was because the current emperor's rule was humane and enlightened, thus heaven saw no need to send plague. But Mao Mao didn't believe that for a second. It was just happenstance that there hadn't been any plagues of insects. That meant, though, that if and when such a plague occurred, it would be a chance to test the emperor's power. He had only recently punished the Shi clan, the most powerful in the land. The timing could hardly have been worse. If a plague of locusts occurred now, many people would assume it was a heavenly rebuke for the destruction of the Shi. Bah! Not my problem. Nothing to do with me, Mao Mao thought. No, it was nothing to do with her, but she was already moving. Almost before she knew what she was doing, Mao Mao was heading for a particular bookstore. No way they'll have it. Zhou detailed drawings had reminded her, she'd seen such illustrations before. She walked among the shops until she reached one that was particularly gloomy and moldy smelling. A bell chimed as she entered, and the owner, resting within like a piece of the furniture, nodded to her. That was as much civility as he was prepared to offer, after which he appeared to go back to sleep. The place looked deserted, bereft of customers, but she knew his purse must be comfortably full these days. He supplies books to the rear palace, after all. Most of the stock was either used books or for rental. There were a few brand new items for sale, but not many. If you wanted something new, you would probably have to order it. The shop owner left these business matters largely to his children, living an almost hermetic life himself. They're not going to have it. This shop specialized in popular fiction and erotic illustrations, not what one would call refined material. Mao Mao had come here nonetheless, because sometimes one could make unexpected finds in shops like this. Almost as soon as she got inside, she rubbed her eyes. What was going on here? She frowned. What was this? Some convenient plot twist. She pointed to a book sitting on a pile on a desk. Hey, mister, can I have a look at that? The shopkeeper grunted. Mao Mao took it for permission and picked up the book. It was thick and heavy, and the cover depicted a bird. This is ridiculous. In fact, it seemed impossible. And yet, there it was. The book was filled with pictures of birds accompanied by descriptions, and there were handwritten marginal notes peppering the pages. What's the story with this thing? Got it in yesterday. The clerk didn't sound very excited. More like he wished she would stop interrupting his nap. Did you get anything else in along with it? Only the one. But the guy said he would come back, I think. Mao Mao's face began to sparkle. This was the second time she had held this book. Yes, it was exactly the same one she'd seen back then. Back in the chamber where she'd been confined. It was one of the books she'd been given as research material on the elixir of immortality, and here it was in her hands. Chapter 2, Yukyo. Mao Mao wondered how this could be. Shisho's stronghold was supposed to have been sealed off. It made no sense for something from there to be here. Even if the clan's possessions had been moved out of the fortress, the fact that she had found one of them here in this marketplace implied some shady dealings somewhere along the line. Well, if that was the game that was afoot, then Mao Mao had an idea. She found the culprit quickly. And how? It was really quite simple. Young lady, you can't call me all the way out here just for something like this. The annoyed speaker was Li Haku, and despite his complaint, he was eagerly trying to get a good look at the verdigris house. They were in Mao Mao's apothecary shop, Li Haku's considerable bulk making the place feel even more cramped than usual. I don't have time to go chasing after petty thieves, Li Haku added, glancing toward the ceiling of the atrium. hoping to catch a glimpse of a countenance like a blossoming flower. Specifically, of Pairin, one of the 3 princesses of the verdigris house. Li Haku, a soldier, an acquaintance of Mao Mao's, was head over heels in love with Pairin. Coming to a brothel, however, took money, so Mao Mao, as a friend of Pairin's, knew that Li Haku would come running whenever she might have a request to make of him. And today, her request was this, that he keep an eye out in the market for any stolen goods that might be circulating. Specifically, books. Encyclopedias were unusual. If one had been stolen, it would be easy to trace when it was sold. And because the thief might go to any number of shops besides the used book place Mao Mao had visited, she wanted Li Haku to be on the alert. Ha! Well, you'll be glad to know I've been watching the place all morning. You didn't ask one of your subordinates to do it. Apparently he'd been so set on making a good impression that he'd handled the matter himself. Given that it was still the cold season, it was a pretty good effort to stake a place out. Li Haku handed Mao Mao a package. A gift of rice dumplings. He accompanied it with another glance toward the atrium. He seemed to be suggesting that he and Mao Mao should have tea together and that she should call Pairin to snack with them. But Mao Mao still needed something from him first. Where's your captive? Out front. One of your guys is watching him. Ah. Mao Mao looked out the window to see 2 of the brothel's guards standing on either side of an emaciated, beardless man. He was wearing fairly heavy clothes. In fact, Mao Mao recognized the cotton-padded jacket. It was dusty and obviously hadn't been washed in days, but she knew it. Well, now. Where had she seen him before? Hey! Li Haku called, but Mao Mao ignored him. She put on her shoes and headed toward the men. Flanked by the 2 large guards, the thief looked smaller than he actually was. Don't get any closer. He's dangerous, one of the guards, a long-serving manservant, said, catching Mao Mao by the collar. She hated being handled like a cat, but this was how it had always been, ever since she was little. She didn't bother squirming away, but only looked at the thief. He didn't say anything. She didn't say anything. But their eyes met, and he studied her face for a second and then he went pale. He opened his mouth, and what should he say but, "Snake girl." He shouted so loud, he sprayed flecks of spittle. Hey, I think you mean cat girl, the guard said teasingly. The other one laughed. Oh, Mao Mao fumed. She didn't have much memory for faces, and the man's appearance was altered by his hollow cheeks, but she was almost sure he had been at the fortress. He was the one who had been guarding her room, the one who had helped her escape from the torture chamber. The one who had interrupted her delicious meal of snake meat. At least it makes sense now, she thought. When he'd told her to run, that it was dangerous, he'd looked like someone who'd just looted a burning building. Since he'd been guarding her room, it would have been a simple matter for him to snatch the books out of it. What's the matter, young lady? Li Haku arrived on the scene and looked at the man, who trembled visibly. If they found out he was a runaway from that fortress, they'd treat him as something much worse than a thief. Maybe, Mao Mao thought, she could use that to her advantage. I'm sorry, sir. He's an acquaintance of mine. Huh. Li Haku said, taken aback by the bluntness of Mao Mao's declaration. She smirked at the criminal. Li Haku was clearly dubious, but when Mao Mao produced some snacks and called Pairin, he quickly went off wagging his tail. And so it was that Mao Mao was left in the apothecary's shop, herself, the thief, and you know, you don't really have to be here, she said, shooting a withering look at the long-serving manservant. Everyone else had gone on tea break, but this man had insisted on following Mao Mao. He'd cleverly helped himself to a handful of dumplings. Afraid I can't leave you 2 alone. If anything were to, happen, I'd catch hell from Mr. Fox and Mr. Mask. The fox referred to the monocled strategist, while the mask was presumably Jinchi, who covered his face whenever he came here. Even with his scar, he was still a valuable jewel of a man. His looks would make him stand out, and his position only complicated things. "Don't worry about it," the manservant added. "I'm just sitting here, eating dumplings. I won't hear a thing." So saying, he went and sat by the wall. He was in his 40s, and had been around the verdigris house since before Mao Mao was born. He had earned the madam's trust by always doing things diligently and accurately. His name was Yukio. He'll squeal to the old lady. I just know it. In other words, she would have to restrict this conversation to things she would be comfortable with the madam knowing about. Stuff that won't get us in trouble if she finds out. Mao Mao looked at the man sitting across from her. 2 books lay on the table between them, the one Mao Mao had found at the used bookstore and the one the thief had intended to sell today. "What happened to the rest of the books?" she asked. The man refused to look at her, like a recalcitrant child. It wasn't a good look for a full-grown man. "I don't have time for this." If he'd sold them at other shops, someone else might already have bought them. Mao Mao slammed a fist down on the table. "That soldier we saw? He was part of the assault on the stronghold," she said, quietly, slowly. "Are you saying you don't care if I tell him you were there?" The man's color got even worse. Mao Mao hated to threaten him after he'd helped her, but this was no time for scruples. She needed to know where those books had gone. Yukio munched thoughtfully on a dumpling, taking his time with each mouthful. He might look easygoing, but if things got physical, he was clearly strong enough to overpower the likes of this guy. The man frowned, fighting with himself, but in the end he bowed his head, defeated. "I still have 3 of the other volumes. 2 of them I sold in another town, and the rest I left." Assuming the fire from the explosions hadn't reached Mao Mao's room, it might still be possible to get their hands on those last volumes. That meant the real problem was those 2 books he'd sold. The ones on the table had to do with birds and fish, respectively. "Did you sell the one about bugs?" "No, I've got one of them still." "One of them?" That piqued Mao Mao's curiosity. The volume about birds had a number on it. If there was AI, there must be a 2. "Can you get it to me, immediately? Can you promise you won't sell me out?" "Depends if you are willing to cooperate," Mao Mao pressed. Yukio, who had been reclining by the wall, could be heard to sigh deeply. "Come on, Mao Mao. Now you're just threatening him." He arranged himself on the cramped floor of the shop and gave the man a friendly smack on the shoulder. "Listen, you must be hungry, right? Looks like you've been through a lot. Why not relax?" The thief didn't say anything. Yukio, meanwhile, simply left the shop. He was soon back holding a tray with a bowl of rice and a side dish. The side dish was nothing more than the leftover stewed locusts, but no sooner had Yukio offered the man chopsticks than the thief took them. Mao Mao was surprised by the man's enthusiasm. Yukio slapped her on the shoulder. "Not there yet." The thief, virtually obsessed with his meal, didn't even look at them. Yukio dropped his voice and said to her, "Just look at him. I think he had a hard road to the capital. Maybe he did sell the books, but it looks like it was either that or starve. The books themselves seem to have been treated well. I don't think he's a bad person." "You might be right," Mao Mao said, but she was absolutely dying to know what had happened to the other books. "You have to know when to use the carrot and when to use the stick." "I know that, damn it." If the old madam was the stick of the verdigris house, this man seemed to be the carrot. He wasn't notably tall, and his face looked like that of any other middle-aged man, but it was his decency that endeared him to the courtesans. Suddenly, the thief stopped shoveling food into his mouth. Yukio looked at him with curiosity. "What's the matter? This is awful. You don't like locusts?" "This ain't a locust," the man said, holding one of the bugs in his chopsticks. "Isn't it? They might call everything a locust around here, but farmers make a distinction." "What sort of distinction?" Mao Mao and Yukio looked closely at the man. He went to work on the mountain of stewed bugs, picking them up one at a time and taking a bite, then separating them into piles. The ratio between the two ended up at close to 8-1. These are locusts. Farmers stew them and eat them. But these are grasshoppers. They look alike, but grasshoppers taste terrible. Are they really that different? Yukio asked. He'd never realized the two were so distinct. Nor had Mao Mao, she'd always mentally classified them together. Take a bite, and you'll figure it out. When you pull off the legs and stew them, they all come out the same color, so the less scrupulous sell them to ignorant merchants. Grasshoppers give real locusts a bad name. Aha! Mr. Owner would have made the perfect mark for a scam like that. With just one locust for every 8 grasshoppers, of course the resulting dish was terrible. Mao Mao took a locust and put it in her mouth. The thief wasn't wrong, it had more body and a better flavor. The man gave the grasshoppers a grim look. Before Mao Mao could speak, though, Yukio said, if there's something going on, tell us. The man said, there might be a famine this year. At that, Mao Mao practically jumped toward him. You think so too? Hey, now, I can't be sure. But when you get a lot more grasshoppers than locusts in a year, it usually means a plague of insects the next season. It was a simple matter of the ratio between the two. And it accorded well with what Zhou Yu had said. Mao Mao gave the man another look. You seem awfully knowledgeable about bugs for a guard. I also seem to remember that room had plenty of things in it more obviously valuable than a set of encyclopedias, yet you went for the books. Why not just leave them? Wouldn't a thief normally choose something easier to pawn? The man scratched the back of his neck, somewhat abashed. I actually, didn't want to sell the encyclopedias. But you told the bookseller you'd be back with more later. You have to schmooze with those types, otherwise you can't get a decent price. Besides, I was hoping to come buy it back if I could scare up the money. I mean, nobody would voluntarily buy an encyclopedia. Ahem. Someone would, Mao Mao wanted to say, but she stopped the words before they came out. The man obviously had only the clothes on his back to his name. It was still winter, so that was fine as far as it went, but his face was grimy. He was so dirty that Mao Mao had somewhat balked at letting him into the apothecary shop. In any case, he wouldn't find it easy to earn much money looking like that. The guy who used to live in confinement, back at the stronghold. I was the one who brought him his meals. Mao Mao's eyes widened, this was unexpected. I guess they brought him there to make some kind of new drug or something, but that wasn't the only thing he was researching. What else was there? This, right here, the man said, indicating the grasshopper. You mean how to prevent a plague? So that was what her predecessor had been trying to discover. Mao Mao swallowed heavily and was about to press the man further when there was a great crash and the door of the shop flew open. Hey, Freckles! Can I eat your dumplings or what? It was Zhou Yu, holding a skewer of dumplings in each hand. The thief blinked several times. Wah! Young moss! Before he could get the words out, Mao Mao grabbed some medicine she'd been pulverizing and flung it into the man's open mouth. Ugh! That's bitter! He practically convulsed. She felt bad for him, but he had been about to say something extremely inconvenient for all of them. She'd do it again if she had to. I should have realized. Of course he would know about Zhou Yu. He'd said the whole reason he'd helped her was because Zhou Yu had asked him to. Publicly, the Shi clan had been destroyed root and branch. The fact that one of them was actually right here was bad news. Zhou Yu watched the man flail with evident amusement. He seemed to wonder what this ridiculous stranger was doing. Yeah, sure, eat the stupid dumplings, Mao Mao said. Just go away. Don't shoo me. What am I, a house pet? Zhou Yu complained. He must not have recognized the man, because he paid him no mind. Hey, Zhou Yu, how about I let you ride on my shoulders? Whoa, really? Awesome. Let me up. Mao Mao was grateful to Yukio for his well-judged distraction. I can't be sure, but I ought to let him know, at least, Mao Mao thought, and crooked her fingers, counting the days until Jinchi would visit again. Chapter 3, Sleep. 3 days later, a masked noble appeared at the apothecary shop as the sun was crossing the meridian. Welcome. Thank goodness you're here. Jinchi was set back on his heels by Mao Mao's warm greeting. Behind him, Gao Shun's mouth hung open, he was clearly wondering what had happened. Hey, what's the matter? Xiao Mao, you do know that that's Master Jinchi before you, right? You don't have him confused with someone else, do you? Mao Mao scowled. Ridiculous reactions, both. Gao Shun glanced at Jinchi, knowing he'd accidentally let the wrong name slip, and was greeted with an annoyed look from behind the mask. Jinchi entered the shop and seated himself on a round cushion. The place wasn't exactly spacious, so Gao Shun retreated to the front room of the verdigris house, as he always did. Once the sliding door was closed, Jinchi finally removed his mask. There, as ever, was his beautiful face, and the scar along his cheek that never failed to look out of place. The stitches had been removed and it looked far less painful than before, but even so, it was enough to make a person sigh with regret for the sheer wastefulness of it. People had started writing entertaining tales of the last year's rebellion of the Shi clan. The hero was the emperor's beautiful younger brother, and the villain was played by Lulin. One might expect the latter role to go to Shisho, the leader of the Shi clan, but Lulin had displaced him in the popular imagination, and that scar, one might suppose, was the reason. The villainess who had injured this unearthly face would be spoken of for generations to come. When Mao Mao remembered the bug-loving palace lady, laughing merrily, she found it gave her a desolate feeling. I thought you had something you wanted to tell me, Jinchi said. Oh. Yes, I did. Mao Mao took the encyclopedia she'd bought down from the bookshelf. What's this? Some opportunist plucked it from the flames of the stronghold and sold it. She would keep quiet about the former guard for the time being. He was under the care of the verdigris house's chief manservant, Yukio, who would know what to do with him. The man who had fled the fortress had decided to start calling himself Seizen. Mao Mao had wanted him to use an assumed name just on the off chance his real one caused the little brat, Zhou, to remember his past. Luckily enough, Seizen seemed to have no special attachment to his former name. Now he was learning the business from Yukio. We were able to recover the books he sold. Yukio had acted immediately to gather them up. Seizen said he'd sold them to a procurer with whom Yukio happened to be acquainted, so the chief manservant talked to the other man and bought the books from him. Meaning there was just one problem left. I think the last of these books is at the fortress. And I want to get my hands on it. Jinchi gave her a look. And why are we collecting these books? Mao Mao decided the best answer to that question was a practical demonstration. She placed a bowl of food in front of Jinchi with a none too elegant think, a mountain of stewed bugs of a rather unappealing color. Jinchi frowned openly and backed away. What in the world are those? Stewed locusts. Although the chief ingredient is actually grasshoppers. Mao Mao picked one up in her chopsticks and leaned toward Jinchi. He backed away again, but soon found himself stymied by the wall, where he simply crumpled. I'm not eating that. No one said anything about eating it. Mao Mao put the grasshopper on a plate and took out a piece of paper with a picture of 2 insects on it, a comparative study of a locust and a grasshopper. It had been based on the fried versions, but it captured the essentials. She'd given Zhou some pocket change for the work. It seems grasshoppers proliferated last year. Weren't there any complaints from the farming villages about damage from insects? Jinchi's face clouded, and he scratched his head with a sigh. Yes, we had some reports. There was significant damage to farms in the northern region. Not enough to cause starvation, though. For better or worse, autumn the year before had been cold, helping to take care of the bugs. They were wiped out before they could increase uncontrollably. Devastation from locusts can continue for several years. What do you plan to do this year? Jinchi's mouth twisted. Maybe the question had already occurred to him. The northern region had, Mao Mao suspected, largely belonged to the Shi clan. With them gone, responsibility for governing the area would fall on the emperor. We're planning to cover for last year's shortfall by distributing some of the excess from the south. But they hadn't yet, it seemed, planned further ahead than that. Jinchi had a furrow in his brow worthy of Gao Shun. If it happens again this year, things are going to be hard, Mao Mao said. People would claim that the plague was a sign that the emperor was not ruling the country properly. They're just bugs, you might think, but such plagues had spelled the end of more than one nation in history. And for this to come the very year after the emperor had destroyed the Shi clan, what would the people make of that? Ridiculous superstition, Mao Mao thought, but in the minds of many, the connection couldn't be dismissed so easily. And the emperor and his relatives had to rule the credulous as well as the skeptical. Insect plague is a natural phenomenon, Jinchi said. What are we supposed to do about it? Set up bonfires to draw them off? Or should we go out and swat every single one individually? He was right, of course. Such an endeavor would be futile. That's why I'm looking into this, Mao Mao said, holding the encyclopedia out toward Jinchi. This was the volume she'd gotten from Seizen, the runaway from the stronghold. The book was thoroughly annotated in the margins. There's another volume dealing with insects, and since it's not here, I think it might be back at the stronghold. The volume in Mao Mao's possession said nothing about grasshoppers, yet it was unimaginable that such a common insect would go unremarked upon in such a thorough book. Also, I believe the apothecary who was at the stronghold before me was researching something about grasshoppers. Truly? Yes, although I don't know how far his research got. Only that it had been desperate. Jinchi stroked his chin thoughtfully, then opened the door and called for Gao Shun, who was just putting a skewer of dumplings in his mouth. He immediately went to summon one of the men servants from the verdigris house. Zhou Yu, never one to miss an opportunity, spotted the abandoned dumplings and helped himself. I should be able to procure it within a few days. I would appreciate that. Mao Mao let out a long breath. This didn't mean things were over, but it did bring some relief for something that had been swirling in her mind for some days now. Jinchi, however, looked pale. He often seemed fatigued recently, now that he could no longer pretend to be a eunuch. And what Mao Mao had said had only added to his workload. Tired, sir? You could say that. But I'll be fine. He had big bags under his eyes, but the officials and court ladies around him didn't seem to notice them. In fact, they seemed to think he was fine. Even with a scar on his face, his beauty was still virtually superhuman, and that threw people off. They seemed to take it for the bloom of health. He's going to collapse at this rate. People whose senses became dulled by fatigue eventually ceased to understand even that they were fatigued. If even Gao Shun were to insist that Jinchi was fine, there would be nothing she could do to stop any of it. He needs some sleep. If he had the time to come all the way out here, he should have spent it resting in his room instead. Mao Mao looked at him with some exasperation. Master Jinchi, wouldn't you like to rest? What's this all of a sudden? I'll prepare a bedroom immediately. I want you to sleep. Mao Mao was looking right at him, and it was impossible to avoid noticing the scar on his right cheek. She realized she was at risk of wanting to study the neat stitching in detail, and dropped her gaze to the ground. Of course she would want to have a good look at her old man's handiwork, the careful stitches covered with ointment. Jinchi would most likely be stuck with the scar, but the healing process would go quickly, and she wished she could observe its progress. You want me to sleep in a place like this? Mao Mao ventured a bit of a joke, can't sleep on your own. Thinking maybe he would resent being spoken to like a child, though, she started to add, that's a... No. No, I can't, Jinchi said before she could finish. It seemed he got lonely by himself. I get it. Mao Mao popped her head out the door of the shop and called to a nearby apprentice, asking her in turn to call the madam. What is it? The old lady asked, not very enthusiastically, when she arrived. But when Mao Mao explained what she wanted, a light started to shine under those baggy old eyelids. Give me half an hour. Is that really enough time? Mao Mao thought, but she proceeded to leave the madam, who suddenly seemed quite invested, to her own devices. Instead she offered Jinchi some restorative tea. This way, please, Mao Mao said, directing Jinchi into the verdigrease house. She led him to a room on the top floor, a chamber appointed with the finest furnishings and a very large bed. Incense was burning, filling the space with a rich, sweet scent. You may rest here, sir. Work is important, but you must take care of yourself. She'd half expected the madam to simply shoot her down, but the old lady seemed to have had some sort of plan, for she offered the establishment's best room for free. And she'd gotten it ready in 30 minutes. An impressive display. Maybe she'd figured it would be best to make a good impression on a member of the nobility. If you want to bathe, a medicinal bath is ready for you. If you'd like pajamas, you can use these. Mao Mao handed him a set of soft cotton sleepwear. Jinchi looked surprised at first, but his smile grew progressively more gentle. It wasn't the smile of a celestial nymph, but it could still have melted the heart of any woman or man. I believe I shall bathe, Jinchi said, heading for the adjoining bath. The tub, filled with hot water painstakingly brought by the men servants, would be the perfect temperature. How they must have struggled, first to boil it and then to bring it here before it cooled. Mao Mao felt a wave of relief, and it seemed like the furrow in Gao Shun's brow he was in a corner of the room softened as well. And yet he also seemed uneasy. I shan't be sleeping alone, Jinchi reiterated. No you shan't, sir. On that count, at least, there would be no question. Jinchi opened the door to the bath with an inscrutable expression and then immediately slammed it shut again and scuttled back to Mao Mao in a tizzy. His scurrying looked somehow comical. He was wearing his mask again. Why are there scantily clad women in the bath? He demanded. No need to worry, sir. They're professionals. The guy could hardly peel his own tangerine, so Mao Mao figured bathing himself was out of the question. She'd asked for clothing to be ready for him, just like when the emperor bathed, and figured that while they were at it he should get a massage too. Don't you like massages, sir? Does it stop at a massage? He ventured. Often not. This was a service industry, after all. And if the customer requested it, many practitioners would add extra services that, well, they didn't bear speaking of. Everyone knew that was how the pleasure quarter worked. Still going to have that bath, sir? Thank you, I'll pass. Change of clothes. I can do it myself. Jinchi took off his overgarment and pointedly pulled on the sleepwear on his own. He's surprisingly well built, Mao Mao observed, although she had no particular emotional reaction to that fact. She picked up the overgarment off the floor, folded it neatly, and put it away in a chest. It still carried a wisp of perfume, an aroma that conveyed its owner's excellent taste. Mao Mao took a cup and a small teapot from the bedside and poured something for Jinchi. He tilted his mask up and took a drink. Sleeping medicine or something. Maybe it had tasted funny. Perhaps Mao Mao should have taken a sip to show that it was safe. It contains nutrients to boost your energy, sir. Jinchi spat out the tea. Mao Mao, finding herself veritably drenched in it, couldn't help giving him a bit of a scowl. Why in the world would you give me that? I've heard it's the most effective remedy when a man is tired. Do you, mean what I think you mean by that? What else could I mean, sir? The look on Jinchi's face was a mixture of disgust and shyness. In fact, he seemed to be making that sort of face a lot today. Maybe there's some problem with me being so direct. Jinchi might be a man, but perhaps he was still embarrassed to hear biological facts stated so plainly. He was still young, after all, and maybe he wasn't as mature as he often looked. She felt bad for acting like he was an animal who would be in rut all year round. Even so, his reaction seemed a little strange. Probably nothing worth worrying about. Jinchi couldn't seem to look Mao Mao in the eye, but she continued, "So, what kind of woman would you prefer?" "Huh," he said stupidly. Mao Mao clapped twice, causing a group of 5 stunning ladies to file in from another room. Each of them looked sweet and innocent. "Lady Suiren told me you prefer them your own age," Mao Mao explained. Suiren was Jinchi's caretaker. She could be mischievous in her way, but she was a first-rate attendant. Given Jinchi's apparent fixation on chastity, they'd endeavored to find Virgin's estate all the more desirable because they were certain not to have any diseases. It had proved impossible to get enough from the verdigris house itself, so they'd pulled some strings at some other nearby brothels. That had earned a frown from the madam, but if they wanted all these virgins on such short notice, that's what it took. The women had been told only that the man involved was a noble, which was enough to get them on board. They were all the more intrigued by what they glimpsed of Jinchi's beauty under his mask. Yes, Jinchi must have had the eye of many a young woman, yet at the moment he was simply standing with his jaw open. He looked at Mao Mao, his total befuddlement obvious even behind his mask. In the corner of the room, Gao Shun had gone beyond holding his head and advanced to pressing his forehead against the wall. "Are none of them to your liking?" Mao Mao asked. It wasn't Jinchi, but the assembled women, who reacted to this. Each started to gesture at Jinchi in whatever way she thought would be most attractive. "None of them have yet known a man," Mao Mao said. The madam herself inspected them. Exactly what kind of inspection it was can be easily guessed. Jinchi, moving as awkwardly as a puppet, looked at Mao Mao. "I just want to go to sleep. Please let me rest." "I see, sir." "Then just pick a woman, any of them." "I mean literally," he exclaimed. Mao Mao's shoulders slumped, and the courtesans left the room in a collective huff. Instead Mao Mao went over to Gao Shun, whose shoulders were even slumpier than hers, and said, "Would you like them, then, sir?" "I have a wife. A scary wife. And my daughter's something of a stickler for cleanliness," he said. "Ah, of course. Maybe it wasn't the best idea to offer courtesans to a married man. Do you know what it's like to be told, 'Papa, you're filthy. You have to bathe last tonight'?" "Yes, sir, I do. I know how his daughter must feel, anyway." She did feel bad for Jinchi's attendant having to stand around, though, so she offered him a nice sofa to sit on. There was another bed, and indeed another entire room available, but Gao Shun politely turned her down when she pointed this out. If anything, he worried that a divorce might be in the offing if he were ever to be discovered in a place like this. Mao Mao went back to where Jinchi was reclining and pulled the covers over him. When she went to leave the room herself, she felt him holding on to her arm. "Surely you could at least spare a lullaby." She didn't say anything at first. She wanted to tell him no, but he was looking at her with those puppy dog eyes he got sometimes. And anyway, after all the excitement with the bath and the courtesans and everything, it seemed this little break hadn't helped him feel refreshed at all. He refused to let go of her, and she let out a sigh. "I'm not a good singer." "I don't care." So, gently tapping the covers to keep time, Mao Mao began to sing. An old children's song that the courtesans used to sing to her. It wasn't long at all before she heard Jinchi's breathing take on the even rhythm of sleep. Jinchi left in the evening, just before the sun sank beneath the horizon. The nap must have been restorative, because he woke up looking much better and ate 3 entire bowls of congee. Mao Mao had started to fear he might work himself to death, but if he was still eating, he wouldn't die. If anything, she thought he might catch trouble from Suiren when he was too full for dinner that night. Or maybe she was worrying too much. With his mask back in place, Jinchi boarded his carriage and Mao Mao watched it leave. As she stood there, she thought she felt a pair of eyes on her. Turning, she saw a courtesan-looking wanton, leaning against the second-floor railing and smoking a pipe. It was Pyrrhin, one of the 3 princesses. Her robe didn't do much to hide her abundant chest. "Isn't it about time you gave in?" she asked. "Gave in to what?" Mao Mao asked, turning away from her elder sister and heading back to the shop. Chapter 4, The Fire Rat Cloak. Mao Mao's apothecary shop closed its doors as the lanterns were being lit at the verdigris house. There was no point doing business after dark, it would only attract unsavory customers, and the lamp oil would be a waste of money, anyway. Mao Mao totaled up the day's earnings and handed them over to the madam. Keeping large sums of cash in her little shack would attract thieves and burglars. Having the money kept somewhere safe was far better, even if she did have to pay for the privilege. Then she gathered up the coals and the herbs and locked up the cramped little shop. "All right, we're going home," she announced. "What, already?" Hyuuga groused, but she took him by the scruff of the neck and headed back to their shack. Though it was located just behind the verdigris house, the walls were riddled with cracks that let in the wind, making it very cold. Mao Mao placed the coals among the starter paper in the stove, and when there was a decent fire going, she tossed some kindling on it. Hyuuga, feeling the cold, was curled up on his sleeping mat, wrapped in his blanket. Mao Mao heated some soup in a pot on the stove, stirring gently. It involved a base of dried meat, along with vegetables and kudzu she'd picked in the garden. She even shaved some ginger into it to take the edge off the chill. "Not going to have any?" she asked. "Sure am," Hyuuga said, trying to shuffle over while still under his blanket like a giant pill bug. Mao Mao smacked him with a knuckle, but tossed a cotton jacket at him in exchange for taking away his blanket. "I wouldn't mind another winter outfit," Mao Mao thought. She was being pretty fairly compensated for bringing up Hyuuga, but she didn't intend to waste the money. Hyuuga might grumble, but so long as Mao Mao was the one getting the cash, the education he would receive was, "Those who don't work don't eat." She poured some soup into a chipped bowl and handed it to Hyuuga, who sat on a chair with his knees up and sipped at it. "Needs more meat," he said. "If you want meat, go earn the money for it," Mao Mao said. Then she took a sip of the soup herself. They didn't have any congee, but she'd been able to get some bread. She took a bit from their supply and set it beside the soup pot to warm it up. Then she broke it in half and stuffed some simmered vegetables inside. She didn't think the bread tasted particularly good, maybe on account of last year's bad harvest. A poor crop led to poor quality grain, perhaps. "You've got money, right, Freckles? Why don't we get some decent food, then?" Hyuuga said, reaching for another piece of bread despite his complaining. "I'm renting the shop from the old lady, moron. Do you have any idea what she charges? Why not find another place, then?" "Listen, you. It's not as simple as that." Mao Mao dipped her bread in what remained of her soup and put it in her mouth. She might have been able to lead a slightly richer life, had she so wished. But she had reasons for not doing so. "You're coming with me tomorrow. We're going clothes shopping. You're cold like that, aren't you?" "Yay!" Hyuuga said, tossing up his hands, but the motion threw him clear off his chair. His paralysis left him unable to catch himself, so he tumbled pathetically to the ground. Mao Mao looked at him for a moment, her expression cool as she washed her bowl in the water bucket. The next day, she and Hyuuga went to the market, which lined the great thoroughfare that bisected the capital from north to south. The farther north you went, the richer the shops became, while the class and quality declined as you went south. The pleasure district was in the south of the capital, so the first market stalls they found didn't even have awnings, they were just wares laid out on rush mats. The farther you went into the side streets, the shadier the shops became. The proximity of the pleasure quarter seemed to breed places selling dubious medicaments. Naturally, an apothecary like Mao Mao wasn't taken in by such products, and the merchants knew it. None of them called to her as she passed their stores. They were looking for men who weren't yet used to the pleasure district, those made the best marks. Mao Mao worked her way toward the center of the capital, grabbing Zhou Yu by the scruff of the neck each time he threatened to wander away. It was sometimes said that buying cheap could actually cost you money. A cotton jacket from one of the street stalls would certainly be inexpensive, but the material would be poor. It would never stand up to the brat running around in it and doing all the things children do. Any merchant with an actual building would know they needed the trust of the local shoppers. A jacket from somewhere with an actual storefront would cost a little more, but would inspire much more confidence in the product. Mao Mao picked a place from the tangle of shops and went in a place that sold clothing to commoners, including used clothing. When she brushed past the curtain and into the shop, she saw clothes hanging from the ceiling. Within, the shopkeeper was mending a garment and yawning. A brazier beside him was filled with crackling coals, but it was surrounded by a shield to prevent the sparks from landing on any of the wares. Ah, used clothes. Don't be picky. Zhou Yu was still small, he would hit a growth spurt soon. It would be more economical to buy something they wouldn't have to hesitate to replace. Mao Mao was looking through the merchandise for a child's padded jacket when something caught her eye. Was that? Zhou Yu, ever eagle-eyed, came over. It was a robe hanging on the wall, a long-skirted outfit of pure white. The lack of color made it look somewhat plain, but it also had a whiff of the exotic. It was most unusual. Mao Mao's eye was drawn to embroidery in what looked like a pattern of vines on the sleeves. Could this be? Geez, that looks pretty cheap, said the little shit. Heaven forfend he ever hesitate to say whatever came into his head. Mao Mao gave him a smack, alert that the shopkeeper might be listening, but from the proprietor all she heard was laughter. Ha, you think that's cheap, boyo? Isn't it? Girls' clothes are supposed to be colorful. I suppose you're right. The shopkeeper put a pin in a pincushion, then rubbed his stiff shoulders and smiled at them. He let his gaze drift to the robe. But this robe, you see, a celestial nymph wore it once. A celestial nymph. That seemed to get Zhou Yu's interest. He had taken a seat on top of a chest of drawers. Maybe the paralysis made it hard for him to stay standing for too long. Annoyed, Mao Mao continued her search through the shop. The shopkeeper here was one of those clerks who killed time by chatting with the customers. No way of telling how much of what he said was true. All she remembered was how he used to get a hold of her father Luomen for hours at a time. I just need to find something, and then we can get out of here. If Zhou Yu was busy talking to the clerk, that was perfect. She could find something while he was distracted. But it was a small place. Like it or not, she was going to hear the clerk's story while she browsed. Why see, that robe came to me from the west. A villager in one of the little villages there helped a girl who was lost on the road. The girl was quite beautiful, and the villager fell head over heels in love with her. She was a most unusual young lady, she had white skin and golden hair. She knew how to spin a thread that was unlike any other, and with it she wove several robes to repay the villager who'd helped her. The robes were embroidered with mysterious designs, and sold for several times what any other cloth was worth. The girl insisted she wanted to go back to her hometown, but she didn't seem to know where she lived. Must have come from some far land, I suppose. The villager proposed to the girl, and then again, and finally she decided to accept him. But it was poor timing, for just then, the girl's family arrived in the village, looking for her. You could tell it was her family because they had the same sort of hair and skin. The villager had finally gotten the girl to agree to his proposal, though, and he wasn't about to give her up. So he hid her away, and the entire village pretended they knew nothing about the matter. The girl's family went away, but they were suspicious. The villager decided he'd better hurry up and hold the wedding and make the young lady his bride. Once they were joined in marriage, her family would no longer be her family, you see. The young lady objected, but the villagers paid her no heed. She was made to bathe at the village spring to purify herself, after which they planned to hold the wedding immediately. The girl wept as she washed herself. Her one comfort was that, for her bridal gown, she wore one of the robes she'd made. A reminder of her lost home. Can you imagine what grief she must have felt? Even as she stood in her bridal gown, she almost drowned herself in tears. As everyone around her celebrated, the girl came up to the altar to swear her vows to the villager. Yet even at that moment, she couldn't forget her family. She begged the man to return her to her relatives. He refused. Whereupon the girl doused herself in some nearby oil, grabbed a torch, and lit herself on fire. She ran in flames past the panicked villagers, until she dove into the spring and vanished. She left behind her only a single piece of cloth, the veil she had been wearing. Of the burning woman herself there was no sign. The villagers speculated that perhaps she'd returned to heaven. Nor was anyone from her family ever seen again, so the villagers all agreed, the girl and her family had disappeared back up to. And that is the robe the nymph was wearing, the shopkeeper proclaimed. Wow! Joyu said, duly impressed. Just a few minutes before, he'd derided the garment as cheap, but now he looked at it as though at a shimmering jewel. Mao Mao, meanwhile, was holding up a succession of jackets to Joyu's back, wondering which of them might fit him best. She found one with a somewhat unpleasant color, but which was the perfect size. Hey, Freckles, this is some gown. How about we buy this? Joyu's eyes were sparkling. The boy's got a point, the shopkeeper ventured. That celestial nymph wasn't much older than you, young lady. I'll even give you a special price on it, since the two of you are so alike. Nice try, but the abacus he was holding suggested the price was still about one digit too many. Mao Mao nearly laughed out loud. A celestial nymph, right? I can see a real one for free. After all, one slightly damaged nymph came to the verdigris house on a regular basis. Are you telling me you don't believe the legend of the nymph? The shopkeeper asked. Some people have no sense of romance. He spread his arms and shook his head with an expression of disappointment. I'm the one who should be disappointed, Mao Mao thought. Not only had she seen a celestial nymph before, she'd seen one vanish into the water just like in the story. The moon spirit had come back out of the water, too, looking like a drenched mouse and asking if she ever planned a repeat performance. But then again, such sights must be rare indeed. Without meaning to, Mao Mao chuckled at the memory. The world was full of strange things, but they always had some explanation. It was only because people didn't know why certain things happened that they made up stories about curses and magical powers and even sometimes ghosts. Mao Mao took a good, hard look at the robe the celestial nymph had woven. May I touch it? Sure. Just don't get it dirty. Mao Mao felt the texture of the fabric and studied the embroidery. Then she grinned. Shopkeep, you really think you can sell this thing at that price? What makes you say that? Of course I can. And yet he'd been trying to foist it off on Mao Mao. If he'd really believed the robe had been woven by a genuine visitor from heaven, he'd have added still another digit to the price. And what if you could sell it for 10 times what you're asking? 10 times? Well, I'd certainly be a happy shopkeeper. I'd give you everything you're holding for free. The clerk sounded like he was joking, but Mao Mao said, would you, now? You heard the man, Joyu. Yeah, I did, but you can't get 10 times the price for that thing, can you? You're out of your mind, Freckles. Even Joyu was making fun of her now. Mao Mao scowled and grabbed a coal from the brazier with a pair of metal chopsticks. I'm going to borrow the robe and this coal for a few minutes, mister. Hey! What are you doing? Mao Mao took out her purse and put it down on the chest of drawers, thunk. It was all the money she had with her, but it ought to cover this one robe. The shopkeeper stopped complaining when he saw the cash. Mao Mao, meanwhile, took the robe and the coal out into the street, and then she threw the garment on the ground. Hey! The shopkeeper started shouting again, looking a little crazed, but Mao Mao ignored him. Instead, she took the coal in her chopsticks and dropped it on the dress. "Hey, Freckles, I'm kinda hot," Joyu said from under several layers of cotton jackets. She'd overdressed him, layering jackets until he looked like a pudgy Daruma doll. "Take a few layers off, then." Joyu was only wearing them because he'd complained about having to carry them. Mao Mao herself was holding a new robe of her own. She usually preferred less eye-watering colors, but she wasn't about to complain about something she'd gotten for free. It fit her, and that was what counted. "Hey, Freckles. Why didn't the robe burn, anyway?" Joyu asked. Mao Mao had snorted in spite of herself at what the shopkeeper had called the celestial nymph's robe. There was a much better name for it than that. "The fire rat cloak," she'd suggested, whispering it into the shopkeeper's ear. The robe had refused to catch fire when she'd dropped the coal on it. In fact, it had emerged without so much as a scorch mark. Passers-by were amazed, so amazed that they might indeed have believed her if she'd told them the robe had belonged to a celestial nymph. "What are clothes made from, Joyu? What are they made from? You mean, like, cotton and hemp and stuff? It's just grass and fibers. And maybe sometimes bugs or something." "That robe was made of rock." Joyu's jaw dropped so fast Mao Mao almost laughed. "Rock? You mean, like, rock? How'd they do that? Even stone can take many different forms. Rock fiber could be turned into cloth." It was an unusual technique, but one that had existed since ancient times, called huohuanbu. But that didn't sound very impressive, so she'd borrowed a name used for the material in the eastern island country. And of course, rock doesn't burn. Still, what must it have looked like to the people witnessing it? Even those who knew about huohuanbu might be seeing it for the first time. The uniqueness of it would help drive the price up among curious collectors. And it had won Mao Mao a veritable wardrobe of free clothes. "Huh, so that's the story. What about the celestial nymph, then?" "I suspect it was half true, and half not." Mao Mao had recognized the embroidery on the sleeves of the robe. It was written in the characters of the foreign country that her old man, Luo Men, had often used to write his notes. When stylized, the characters could look like swirling, climbing vines. The so-called celestial nymph had probably been from that area, and if she'd had golden hair and white skin, maybe she had some northern blood in her veins as well. If the marriage of close relatives went on too long in a small village, the offspring would grow weaker, so the inhabitants of such places would certainly wish for more distant bloodlines. Maybe the young woman really had been lost, or maybe she'd been kidnapped. Whichever it was, the villagers certainly wouldn't want to let such a prize go. So the girl had made her dress, sick with the wish to go home to her family. She wove with an unusual material, rock fiber, and embroidered it with characters the villagers couldn't read, a secret message asking for help from her homeland. On the day of the wedding, she'd most likely been wearing undergarments she'd soaked with water. She would have drenched her hair, too, using her veil to conceal the fact. "Did you know there's a way to prevent a wooden bowl from burning even if you put fire to it?" Mao Mao said. "You simply filled the bowl with water. Until it dried completely, the wood wouldn't catch fire. At least so long as the heat didn't get above a certain temperature. If the woman wore wetted undergarments under a robe of rock fiber, and if she then put a more flammable garment over that as well, then all she needed to do was jump in the spring before she sustained any burns. If she used the patterns on the robe to indicate how she'd escaped, it was likely someone would find her later. Of course, she would have had no guarantee that it would work. But judging by the shopkeeper's tale, she'd succeeded. On some level, it wasn't so different from the performance they'd put on at the banquet for the envoys the year before. "Huh?" Joyu said, looking genuinely impressed. "Why didn't you say any of that to the guy at the store? I wouldn't want to spoil the romance." Joyu laughed, as if to admit that she was right. There was, one might add, another reason, albeit one Joyu didn't need to know about. There had been fine embroidery on the inside of the robe as well as the sleeves. So we have a young lady from somewhere either in the west or the north, Mao Mao thought. Would a perfectly ordinary young woman have the nerve to set fire to herself and run around? Mao Mao certainly wouldn't. What's more, the young lady could read, and knew how to make the stone fiber. Did everyone on the streets in these other lands know how to do those things? It seemed unlikely that some wandering performer would possess such accomplishments. Maybe she was a spy or something. The West was more prone to small border disputes with other countries than were many nearby regions. The idea that the young woman was an intelligence agent wasn't out of the question, although if so, she seemed to be a somewhat careless one. Mao Mao, for her part, smiled sardonically at these pointless fantasies and continued on the way home. Chapter 5, Let Them Eat Cake. Apothecary. Apothecary. Come quickly. A haggard man was pounding furiously on the door of the shack. Mao Mao, not looking pleased, rolled out of bed and opened the little window at the entrance in a way that made it clear she found this a nuisance. A filthy, middle-aged man stood outside, not someone who looked like he had any money. She was about to close the window and pretend she hadn't seen anything. I know you can hear me. Damn it. She didn't want to deal with this. Why would he come to her shop, anyway? He'd probably come to her old man once, tugged at his heartstrings until some charity had been forthcoming. This was why her father never had any money. What happened to the old guy who used to be here? He's gone. Went to find his fortune. What? Don't bullshit me. The man pounded angrily on the door of the tumble-down house, but Mao Mao only gave him a cold stare. She even found herself grunting pfft, somewhat in spite of herself. You're supposed to be running an apothecary shop. Don't you even have any medicine? Yeah, I'm running an apothecary shop, all right. As a business. That means money talks. Mao Mao would hardly be averse to seeing the man, if he had cash, but he didn't seem to be here in that kind of good faith. You'd take money from the poor and needy. If you can't pay, then stay away. It's because the likes of you come rooting around that I have to live in this shack. Mao Mao gave the door a good rap herself to scare the man away. Zhou hid behind her, holding a soup pot and a ladle. If anything happened, he would smack them together to make as much noise as possible. He might be impudent, but he had a decent head on his shoulders. It would be loud enough to bring someone from the verdigris house. The visitor, though, had gone silent. Mao Mao hated this sort. If people thought you'd hand out donations to them, they wouldn't hesitate to take advantage of you. The man's grimy face broke into a scowl when he saw Mao Mao wasn't going to give in. He leaned weakly against the door. If it's money you want, I'll pay you. Not right away, but I swear I will. So please, come look. My child. The old collapse in a crying heap routine. Nice. Still, the man sat there with his head down, showing no sign of moving. Now we can't get out the door, Mao Mao thought. Hey, Freckles, Zhou, still holding the cooking utensils, was glancing at her. This is ridiculous, Mao Mao thought, but despite her frustration, she grabbed a brush off the table and plunged it into some ink. She opened a beat-up old cupboard, revealing a sheaf of paper and some wood strips. She took out one of the strips and jotted something on it, then flung it at the man. Can you at least write your name? After a beat, the man said, No. I can't. Thought not. Next she tossed a knife to him. Use that to make your mark. Just your thumbs plenty. The man squinted at the wood strip, but he couldn't possibly read what was on it. What does it say? He asked. That you'll pay for the treatment. It's an IOU. Reluctantly, the man pressed the knife into the pad of his thumb, then made a mark in blood on the strip. Seems like a lot of trouble, Zhou muttered from behind her, but she nudged him with her toe to shut him up. This all right? The man asked, looking at his thumb and handing the wood strip back to Mao Mao. Guess it'll have to be. Mao Mao smiled a bit villainously, but smiled all the same and undid the door bar. The man eventually led her to an alleyway not far from the pleasure district. Men with haggard bodies and dirty clothes watched them. The man who had brought her gave the others a threatening look. Maybe we should have brought another bodyguard or two. Mao Mao wasn't stupid enough to just run off after the guy. She'd asked Yukio to come along. He might be a bit excitable, but as the head of the men servants he knew his way around rough company. What did we come all the way out here for? Yukio asked. I don't like it any more than you do, but what else was I supposed to do? Huh. So you take after your old man, after all, he said, musing her hair fondly. She pushed his hand away. This is it, the man said, leading them into a shack that had a piece of cloth instead of a door. A rancid smell filled the air, along with the odors of sweat and grime, not to mention old trash and even human waste. A child, not so different in age from Joyu, lay on top of something dirty. It might have been a reed mat, or maybe rushes, Mao Mao couldn't tell. Beside her, a rather older child looked at the man with empty eyes. She was a girl, several years younger than Mao Mao, but she had none of the vitality her youth deserved. Daddy! She must have cried all her tears long ago, for her cheeks were dry as she looked at the man. Here she is. I'm begging you, examine her. Wordlessly, Mao Mao looked at the girl lying on the mat. The color of her arms and legs was dull. Her body spasmed occasionally, and the smell of waste was probably due to whatever was coming out of her. Her hair was such a mess that it was hard to tell whether she was a boy or a girl, and she was terribly filthy. How long has she been like this? Since a few days ago. But even before that, her hands seemed to be bothering her, the older girl answered. Mao Mao wrapped a cloth around each of her own hands, as well as around her mouth, and then she approached the child. Hey, what do you think you're doing? The father demanded angrily. What do you mean, what? She's sick, isn't she? I won't do anyone any good if I catch whatever she has. But if it bothers you that much, I don't have to look at her. Mao Mao glared at the man, and he lowered the hand he had raised, prompting Yukio, who had come up behind him, to cross his arms as well. He'd probably been preparing to put the man's arm out of joint if he'd turned violent. Overprotective, Mao Mao thought. She touched the child's hand. Circulation was poor, the blood wasn't reaching the fingertips, which were turning necrotic as if with frostbite. The place was drafty, to be sure, but not cold enough for that. Besides, the child almost looked paralyzed. Her eyes were open and she made strange sounds occasionally, as if in a waking dream. She's worse than this morning. What do we do, Daddy? She'll end up like Mommy. The father looked at his daughter, who looked about to cry, and seemed at a loss. He scratched his head and crouched down. Please. You've gotta help her. I don't want to lose another family member. The older girl also fell to her knees, and both of them pressed their foreheads into the dirt floor. Well, this is a tough one. Her mother died the same way. Mao Mao asked. No. She succumbed to a miscarriage. A miscarriage? Mao Mao looked at the spittle dribbling down the immobile child's cheek. There was a layer of thick stuff around her mouth. Have you been able to get her to eat anything? We gave her some congee, just a little. At that, Mao Mao looked over at the filthy stove, where she saw an ash-covered clay pot containing gruel the consistency of glue. It was hard to see much that looked like rice in it. It seemed to contain whatever they'd been able to scare up. What exactly is in that? She asked. Aside from the scarce rice, she saw what she took to be potatoes and various herbs. Did it also contain other grains? The older girl stumbled out of the house and returned with a handful of herbs. Nothing poisonous, but nothing nutritious either. The sort of grasses one ate to stave off starvation during times of famine. I know this isn't it. What else? Mao Mao asked, but the girl averted her eyes. Nothing, she pressed, and finally the girl gave in and opened a cupboard, from which she produced some small cakes. Several of them, each carefully wrapped. Not of a quality that would have passed muster among the consorts of the rear palace, but still, they had a distinctly sweet smell. If they seemed a little damp, it was probably because they were being conserved, eaten bit by precious bit. "What are those?" the father asked, his eyes widening in surprise. Apparently this was the first time he was learning of them. "Someone gave them to us. We decided to have them a little bit at a time when there was nothing to eat. We showed them to Mommy, but she said not to tell you about them, Daddy." Shocked by the deception, the man's face twisted into a grimace. "How dare you hide those from me? I run this house." The older girl's lifeless eyes suddenly took on a spark. "But you don't ever work, Daddy. You only gamble. You make us beg by the roadside and then you take what we earn." Her words were harsh, but judging by the way the man's head drooped, evidently true. Here Mau Mau had been thinking he only wanted the best for his daughter, but maybe he'd just been afraid to lose a source of income. "Did you give your sister any of this?" Mau Mau asked, and the girl nodded. Mau Mau tore off a bit of the cake, sniffed it, and licked a few crumbs from her fingers. Her eyes narrowed. "You said someone gave this to you. It was sweet enough to tell it contained sugar. An awfully rich donation to give a waif on the street. Who gave it to you?" Mau Mau asked. "When?" "Don't know. My little sister was the one who got it, and she can't talk. It was before Mommy died, so I guess maybe a month ago." A cake with proper sugar was a real luxury for a commoner. Surely anyone who found themselves in possession of such a thing would simply eat it before it was taken from them. "You know anyone else who got anything like this?" Mau Mau asked, but the girl shook her head. "All right. Was anyone showing symptoms like this girl's about a month ago?" "Now that you mention it," Yukio said. "He always was a sharp one." When Mau Mau saw him leave, she turned back to the child. She removed the cloth from around her hands and mouth and picked the girl up. "Hey! What do you think you're doing? I'm taking her back with me. She'll never get better in a cesspit like this. And take my advice, get rid of those treats." More than anything, it didn't look like the girl had any hope of getting a decent meal in this place. And there was something else that bugged Mau Mau too. "Let me take her," Yukio said, coming back. "Thank you." Mau Mau handed the child to him, and together they left the shack behind. "The old man next door, his fingers were rotted off," Yukio said as he trotted along carrying the girl. He said he'd spoken to the old man as the elder was begging by the roadside. His recollections had been hazy at first, but a few small coins in his palm had soon jogged his memory. He said a woman was giving them out. Claims he didn't see her face. Mau Mau said. This story was starting to sound fishy. Yukio saw Mau Mau back to her home, then headed straight for the verdigrease house. She tried to give him a few coins, but he said, "I'm used to protecting kids," and refused. It was how he'd always been. Mau Mau brought the grimy child into her shack. Joyu, who'd been left effectively to watch the house, gave a pointed sniff. "What's with her? She's filthy. A good reason for you to go heat some water. And here, take this and go ask Grams for some white rice." She gave him a handful of coins, and he dutifully went over to the verdigrease house. The thought of white rice to eat must have motivated him. It seemed likely the girl's condition had taken a sudden turn for the worse because of the cakes she'd been fed. The older girl had said she hadn't eaten any herself, but had saved them all for her sister. If Mom was pregnant, maybe she'd found herself snacking on some too. Mau Mau looked on the shelf. Given that she ran an apothecary shop in the pleasure district, she kept a supply of various abortifacients on hand, many of which would be deadly in the wrong dosage. One of them produced symptoms much like this. It was a toxin found in bad grain, and even small amounts could cause poisoning. The toxin restricted blood flow to the limbs and could quickly induce necrosis. The body became paralyzed, and people sometimes had hallucinations. The treatment was simple: stop ingesting the poison. That, and some exercise would work it out of the body. Sadly for this girl, if she'd been left in her house, she would have likely wasted away before she got better. Hence, Mao Mao had transferred her. I wonder if I really needed to do that, she thought. It wasn't as if she believed the father would ever actually pay her. And if he did, she had to suspect the money would come from the older sister's begging. Even as she reflected that she'd really stepped in at this time, she was already getting some clean rags together. A few days later, they had a visitor, but it wasn't the middle-aged man again. Rather, his daughter. She had fresh bruises and Mao Mao doubted she'd gotten them from falling down. The girl's little sister had recovered to the point where she could walk, albeit not very steadily. Malnutrition was a far bigger concern for her than the toxin had been. Her fingers still didn't move very well, but that would probably heal in time. Mao Mao was relieved to have at last gotten her into the bath the day before. At the moment, the girl was out for a walk with Joyu, who'd started to act like a big brother to her. "Did you bring my money?" Mao Mao asked the grubby young girl, her gaze hard. "Where's my little sister? See for yourself." Joyu could be seen outside the crude window, helping the child as she stumbled along. With her hair washed and tied up, she was actually starting to look like a little girl again. When she spotted her sister, the older girl almost went running over to her, but Mao Mao caught her hand. "My money. Money. Your money." She didn't have it. Of course she didn't. Mao Mao had known from the moment the old man had failed to come himself. That was why she'd had him sign what she had. She flashed the wooden slip at the girl. "You don't have it? That's fine. You can just sell her." She jerked her thumb toward the toddling child. "It's probably not too late, if we start training her now." The older girl went silent for a beat, then her eyes slowly met Mao Mao's. Mao Mao had been sure she would break down crying. But those dim, near-dead eyes had that spark in them again. "I would bring more than a mute little girl," the older sister said, smacking herself demonstratively on the chest. A chest, Mao Mao noted, even less impressive than her own abysmal example. Mao Mao looked at the girl. "You're saying you'll take your sister's place? Do you know what you're volunteering for?" She leaned against the wall and scratched her shin with her toes. "I know full well. But it's either that, or keep begging for the rest of my life. I'm sure he'll have me turning tricks before long, anyway. Daddy takes away whatever little money I earn every day, so what's the difference?" She stamped her feet on the floor. Better to just go ahead and be a prostitute. Sometimes, young women came knocking on Mao Mao's door, young women under the mistaken impression that the courtesans of the verdigris house enjoyed a far better life than those on the lowest level of society. Knowing that Mao Mao was somehow connected to the place, they wanted her to put in a good word for them. This girl seemed to have come here with something similar in mind. Mao Mao gave her an appraising look, then sighed pointedly. "And you think you're worth that much? In your state, a farm girl fresh from the fields would fetch more than you. But my little sister's in the same condition. And she can't even talk. But she's younger than you are. That means quicker to learn discipline. Besides, you'd be surprised how many men out there prefer the silent types." She was being deliberately cruel, but the young woman's eyes remained fixed on her. The girl never averted her gaze, the light in her eyes only burned stronger. "I have to get out of there. It's that, or spend the rest of my life as the mud under his feet. And I'll take anything, before that." Mao Mao put her pinky in her ear and started scratching industriously. It was a perfectly common story. When you were trapped in the mud, the harder you struggled to get free, the deeper you got sucked in. But maybe fighting was still better than not doing anything at all, just waiting to sink to your doom. Mao Mao liked the ones who tried to take matters into their own hands, even if it was futile, instead of waiting and hoping someone would miraculously show up to pull them out. Even so, she had no special reason to help this girl, but also no special reason to stop her. The lady who runs that brothel is the most miserly old hag in the entire capital, Mao Mao said. If she doesn't think you'll make her money, she won't give you the time of day, and even if she does purchase you, she'll lowball you as hard as she can. The young woman still didn't flinch. If you come to her with nothing to offer but your own haggard body, she'll probably slap a collar on you so you don't run away. And if you manage to escape anyway, or at least try to, well, get ready to pay for it with a rib or two. Is that all? That would be nothing next to having my own father break my arm. I'm through living like a rat in a hole. So what do we do with your little sister? I'm sure the old lady will take her in once she sees that I'll work hard enough to cover both of us. The Verdigris house was a practical place. If the girl could generate that sort of money, the madam would probably indulge her. If she can't make any use of you, neither of you will be any better than rats. Still looking less than pleased, Mao Mao went over to a chest of clothes and rifled through it, pulling out an outfit almost at random. One of the things she'd gotten at the used clothes shop. It bordered on the ostentatious, but she tossed it at the filthy young girl. Use the well to wash up everything, including your hair. It'll be cold. Too bad. If you have one solitary flea on you when you show up, she'll chase you away with a broom before you get in the door. The girl clutched the clothing and made for the well. What would happen to her after this was none of Mao Mao's concern. She'd chosen this path for herself. If she was going to regret it, then she could stay in the mud until she sank out of sight. Chapter 6, The Last Volume. Gao Shun's son Basin came knocking on the door of the apothecary shop with several volumes of the encyclopedia. Mao Mao offered the young man, who looked every bit as put out as usual, the battered cushion and poured some tea for him. Master Jinchi is busy, Basin said. Evidently meaning he didn't have the spare time to be coming here. The reason he was still using Jinchi's eunuch name was partly as an alias, but chiefly because Basin simply couldn't speak his true name. The names of nobles were not to be pronounced lightly in the hearing of commoners. The courtesans of the Verdigris house were all aflutter to see Mao Mao entertaining someone other than the usual beauty and his attendant. The madam, in particular, was trying to act nonchalant, but Mao Mao could see the abacus working in her head. Unlike when she was with Jinchi, the door to the shop remained open while Basin was present, their dealings completely visible to the world. Perhaps it was an act of consideration on Basin's part, a way of showing that nothing inappropriate was happening between them. I've brought what you asked for, Basin said, and undid a package wrapped in cloth to reveal several thick books, one of which Mao Mao recognized quite well. An encyclopedia of bugs, part of a set that included books about birds, fish, and plants as well. Mao Mao's interests were primarily herbal in nature. She'd devoured the volume on plant life, but this one on bugs she'd merely skimmed. I hope it's in here, she thought. Sazan had said her predecessor had been working on research regarding locusts. It must be here. But she didn't see it. No matter how many times she looked, she couldn't find anything on them. Eventually, even Basin started flipping the pages, searching for the elusive entry. It's not in here, he finally asked. It would seem not. You said it would be. So what if she had? What wasn't there, wasn't there? It was confusing at best, though. Had Sazan pulled a fast one on them? Not likely. What would he get out of it? Did anyone handle this book while it was in storage? Mao Mao asked, even though she knew that this was to cast suspicion on the soldier who'd obtained it. Who would be interested in something like this? People like what they like. Nonetheless, the possibility seemed remote. If someone was going to loot the place, there were more obviously valuable things to steal. Mao Mao groaned dispiritedly, but then she spotted someone coming toward the shop. Someone moving with all the grace of a willow tree in a gentle breeze, yet profoundly well endowed. It was her older sister Pyrrhin. Mao Mao watched her with a scowl forming on her face. The madam was trailing behind Pyrrhin, making no effort to stop her. She'd already sized up Basin, it seemed. Pyrrhin was a very pleasant courtesan. She was the oldest one working at the Verdigris house, but her beauty was undiminished, and she still caught the eye of many a man. The big dog Lee Haku was a prime example. She was also reputed to be the greatest dancer in the capital. Not to mention a fine older sister, she was always kind to the younger courtesans and the apprentices. However, she wasn't without her faults. Pyrrhin sidled up and stood behind Basin, then ran one beautiful, shapely finger along his cheek. Basin just about jumped out of his skin, although he somehow managed to remain seated while he did it. No, it might not make much sense, but evidently he was agile enough to jump without ever getting up. Sis. Oh, pardon me. He had some dust on his shoulder. There was no way that was true. If the dust was on his shoulder, why brush his cheek? Pyrrhin's every movement was studied and elegant, each gesture exuded womanliness. Her eyes were smiling gently, but to Mao Mao she looked like a hungry carnivore. Pyrrhin had been taking tea the past several days, in other words, she hadn't been seeing clients. This was no indication that she couldn't attract paying customers, rather, it was a sign that working every day was beneath her. But there was a wrinkle: Pyrrhin didn't like taking tea. Her appetite was going unsatisfied. What's going on? Basin tried to back away, but it was a small shop. Pyrrhin soon had him cornered. Gracious, it's still there. Here, hold still, and I'll get it for you. Mao Mao slid her mortar and pestle out of the way and put them up on a shelf before Basin could stumble over them. The tray of teacups and snacks, she held in her hand. She'll give him the first time free. Basin's face was somehow simultaneously both pale and flushed. If Lee Haku were to show up at this exact moment, things would really get interesting. Mao Mao put on her shoes and munched on one of the snacks she was safeguarding. They weren't as nice as the ones that were brought out when Jinchi visited, that was just like the old lady. Still, they were perfectly luxurious, thin rice crackers with a mild taste of shrimp. Just the sort of thing Mao Mao liked. Oh, man! I got it! He's a virgin, she thought. There was just something about him that said it. It made sense now, she thought, leaning against one wall and taking another bite of rice cracker, then washing it down with tea. She saw an apprentice watching her enviously, but she could hardly give the girl a snack right in front of the madam. Instead, she resolved not to eat the last cracker, but save it to give the girl later. Arg! I gave you what I was sent here to give you. I'm leaving. Basin said, trying to pull his belt tight again. Pyrrhin had almost gotten it off him, as he fled the shop. Mao Mao wondered if she should tell him that his underwear was showing. Ah, Pyrrhin said, sitting down. A virgin, and I almost had him. So she thought so too. Pyrrhin would have been an exemplary elder sister, if not for behavior like this. And Mao Mao felt she was getting worse every year. And to think one taste, and it's paradise, the madam said regretfully. Pretty sure you mean hell, Mao Mao thought. She'd better tell Lee Haku to hurry up and save his money to buy Pyrrhin out. Before Joyu got old enough to catch the princess's eye. Seizen was sweeping by the front gate. Until he got strong enough to serve as a proper manservant, he was stuck doing what amounted to apprentice's work. That was how Yukio, the foreman of the men servants, ran things. If the candidate seemed too content with menial labor, Yukio would decide he didn't have the right stuff to make a worthwhile member of the staff, and in due course he would be released. Men who displayed indignation at having to do the work of young girls and tried to learn other jobs would be taken on board. The sight of Seizen humming a tune as he swept the ground left little doubt in Mao Mao's mind that he was not long for their establishment. Hey, Mao Mao said brusquely. Having changed out of his dirty clothing and shaved his beard, Seizen looked several years younger. The book's here. She showed him the volumes Basin had brought her, which she had wrapped in a carrying cloth. There was an audible thunk as she set it down. And it's not what you said it would be. Including the books Sazin had had with him, the entire encyclopedia came to 14 volumes. None of them, however, seemed to contain anything about locusts. Mao Mao remembered the 14 books from when she had been in that little room, so she knew the numbers matched. What? But that doesn't make any sense. Sazin undid the cloth and looked at the books. He squinted, inspecting them closely, and then his face darkened. This isn't all of them, he announced. It's all the books that were in that room, Mao Mao said, confident that even she could count to 14. No, I mean these specifically, Sazin said, picking up the bug-related tomes. There were 2 of them, clearly labeled I and II. There were supposed to be 3 volumes about insects. What? That meant there was at least one book that had never been in that room, or at least, that someone had removed it before Mao Mao got there. Huh. I wonder who would ever take something like that, Sazin said. It looks like you would. No. During the old guy's time, the book was there, I know it was. The old guy was presumably the physician who had been banished from the rear palace. He'd been researching an elixir of immortality, or so Mao Mao had heard. I wonder if they buried him with it or something, Sazin said. Why in the world would they do that? It's a tradition in my hometown. Well, she wasn't asking about Sazin's hometown, was she? But she was curious about the old guy. Why did he die, anyway? Had it been simple old age? If he'd lived, he would have been about the same age as Mao Mao's old man, so it wouldn't be that surprising. The deceased physician was also said to have studied in the West at one point, so perhaps they'd known each other. Ah. Well. It was an experiment gone wrong. Gone wrong. They were trying to create an elixir of immortality, right? And to do that, you've got to test it out, don't you? Does that mean? There was something Mao Mao had been wondering about, something about the resurrection drug that had been used on Zhou and the other children. Zhou had gotten off with just some mild paralysis, but a drug that effectively killed you and then brought you back to life would never simply work that well on the first try. They must have conducted a series of experiments, gradually increasing the prospect of success. So how had they done the experiments? They'd used rats, yes, but to really know it was going to work, you would eventually have to test it on actual human beings. Hey! What's wrong with you? Sazin grimaced. For a moment Mao Mao wondered why, but she soon realized, she was grinning horribly from ear to ear. Tell me. Where did they bury him? No idea. I wasn't the one in charge of that sort of thing. Who was? Sazin scratched his head. I guess you'd know her by the name Suirei. She was the old guy's helper. You know, the expressionless one. The young mistress's, older half-sister, I guess they called her. A shock ran through Mao Mao, and before she knew what she was doing, she had smacked Sazin on the shoulder as hard as she could. Why hadn't she realized it sooner? Suirei, a surviving member of the Shi clan, the previous emperor's granddaughter, and Shisui's half-sister. Ouch! What did you do that for? I've got it. You just keep sweeping. Don't slack. Mao Mao rewrapped the book in its cloth, then rushed back to her shop to write a letter. She requested a manservant to deliver her missive as soon as possible. Writing directly to Jinchi would have been to overstep herself, so she typically addressed her letters to either Gao Shun or Basin, but given that Basin didn't always seem to have it together very well, she mostly wrote to Gao Shun. The next morning came quickly, and with it an answer to her letter, followed closely by a carriage to pick her up. It would take her to where Suirei was. Mao Mao had heard she was now living with Aduo, a former high consort. Mao Mao gave the encyclopedia volumes to a servant who came along with the carriage, then closed the shop door. Ah, you get to go out? Lucky you. Zhou Yu said, tugging on Mao Mao's sleeve. She frowned at him. Take me too. Absolutely not. Not only Suirei, but the other Shi clan children lived with Aduo. Keeping Joyu away from all of them was the whole point of having him here. She wasn't about to take him straight to them. Jerk. You get to have all the fun. I'm going for work. Maybe you can pass the time by cleaning in front of the shop or something. She patted him on the head and passed him off to Yukio. Yukio, who liked kids, went away with Joyu riding on his shoulders. The new girl, the poor man's daughter, was hanging around too. Her older sister was currently in an evaluation period as an apprentice. The madam had made clear that if she turned out to be a poor learner, she would soon be turned out, period. The girl's father had come to take them back several times, but each time the men servants had chased him away. He'd tried to browbeat Mao Mao as well, but it was his daughter who had said she wanted to be a courtesan. Mao Mao hadn't been involved then and wasn't involved now, and above all, she still hadn't gotten any money. Come on, hurry up and pay me. She hoped his payment would appropriately reflect the complete success of her efforts. Mao Mao looked over at Joyu riding on Yukio's shoulders. And what are we going to do about him? If he hadn't been partially paralyzed, they could have trained him as one of the men servants, but to be a bouncer at a brothel required a certain level of physical capacity. Maybe I should make him an apothecary, Mao Mao thought. At the moment, though, Joyu showed no interest in matters medicinal. Mao Mao, by contrast, had already known 100 different formulae by his age. How can he not be interested when it's so fascinating? Mao Mao got into the carriage, pouting a little. Aduo's residence was grand and sumptuous, as befitted an imperial villa. Mao Mao was made to change clothes before she disembarked the carriage. She knew Aduo didn't particularly care about such niceties, but propriety demanded it. Thus Mao Mao found herself walking along, holding up the hem of her long skirt so it wouldn't get dirty. She passed under a magnificent gate and through a courtyard laid with gravel. It was like a painting, garden stones and gravel and moss. The beauty of the place amply communicated the groundskeeper's pride in their work. After a short walk, Mao Mao arrived at a room where she found both Aduo, the mistress of the house, and another person, both of them dressed like men. Welcome. Aduo's voice was as clear and strong as ever, indeed, perhaps even more than before. The person with her was Suirei. Perhaps she was dressed in male attire because she'd become used to it, or perhaps she had some other reason. She was as expressionless as she'd always been, and stood a step behind Aduo. I suppose there's no need for formalities. I'll be present, but don't mind me. Please, speak freely. So saying, Aduo seated herself on a couch, then gestured to Mao Mao, who, as a guest, sat next, and finally Suirei took a seat. Don't mind me. Easy for her to say. How could Mao Mao not mind her? Despite having some difficulty with the request, Mao Mao took the encyclopedia volumes, brought in by the servant, and set them on the table. Well, if this was something they didn't want Aduo to know, then Jinchi presumably would have handled things differently. Mao Mao had no choice but to forge ahead. Do you recognize these? My mentor was using them. Suirei's tone was more polite than usual, perhaps because Aduo was there. Is this all of them? Suirei cocked her head and looked at the books. After a moment she said, one's missing. I believe there should be 15 volumes. And do you know where the missing volume might be? I'm afraid I don't, she said softly, and it didn't look like she was lying. What reason did she have to lie, anyway? Any connection between her and the Shi clan was already moot, but neither could she show herself in public. Her only path in life was to be sequestered in a place like this. Mao Mao didn't know what might happen to her, what the emperor had planned for her, but she felt it was a waste. Suirei was a talented pharmacist. If she didn't know where the book was, then they would have to move on to the next question. This mentor of yours, then. Do you know where he is? The little flinch this provoked from Suirei didn't escape Mao Mao's notice. Aduo sipped her tea and watched them. I knew it. He's alive, Mao Mao said, more a statement than a question. He must have tested the resurrection drug on himself. Suire lowered her eyes, then slowly closed them. Finally she nodded in resignation. That's right. It was the only way out of that fortress. So Suire's mentor had taken the resurrection drug himself, on the pretense of doing an experiment. And from the way she was talking, he had survived the experience. But Suire added, you won't be able to find out what you want to know from him. It doesn't even matter if you talk to him or not. What do you mean? Mao Mao asked. Suire's eyes widened slightly. The boy Zhou, that's what you call him now, isn't it? You know what happened to him. Can't you connect the dots? Zhou had indeed taken the drug, died, and come back to life. But it had impaired the movement on one side of his body, and he had lost his memories as well. Are you suggesting your mentor is amnesiac? Not exactly, but you've got the right idea. In fact, you may have crossed paths with him already without ever knowing it. What are you getting at? Suire's eyes drifted down sadly. You remember the hot springs town? Yes. A hidden village that worshipped a fox deity. The light of the lanterns there still burned brightly in her memory. One of the bedridden old men there was my mentor. The hot springs town was a place for rejuvenation and recovery, and there had been more than one person fitting that description. He no longer remembers who or what he once was. If he had been well, I don't believe she would ever have imagined dragging you into all that. Her face darkened again as she spoke the word she. Mao Mao didn't know what kind of relationship the half-sisters Suire and Shisui had built together, but she strongly suspected Suire was smart enough to have realized that she herself was one of the reasons Shisui had done what she did. Shisui may have wanted to help the country prosper, but she had also wanted to get her older sister out from under their mother's thumb. I see, Mao Mao said, her body going limp with disappointment. She'd finally dared to hope they might get some answers. No, it was too soon to give up yet. In that case, I'd like to know about the research on locusts that your mentor was doing. Mao Mao placed the 2 volumes about insects in front of Suire, but the other woman shook her head again. I had nothing to contribute to that research. I hate bugs. They were more her specialty. Ah. Suire had developed a phobia of snakes and bugs because of the disciplinary torture she'd been subjected to. And the other girl to whom Suire alluded was gone now. Mao Mao's shoulders slumped again. When my mentor was ordered to create the elixir of immortality, almost all the research he'd done to that point was destroyed. He was able to preserve little more than what was in that room. So they'd destroyed his other work in order to make him focus on the elixir. Suire's mentor, intent on continuing the Locust project, had used Seizen, who was in charge of obtaining supplies for him, to conduct some investigations. Suddenly Aduo, who'd been silent throughout the conversation, spoke up. Now I see. She set her teacup on the table and looked at Suire. She appears to have been a most intelligent young woman. It doesn't matter how intelligent she was. She's gone now. And nothing could bring her back. Suire seemed to have resigned herself to her sister's disappearance. Mao Mao clenched a fist. And do you think someone so smart would have failed to leave something behind? Mao Mao's mind reeled. There was a bang. Mao Mao put a hand on the table as Suire stood up abruptly. My apologies, Suire said. Not at all. You don't need to be so stiff, Aduo said. I hate undue formality. Just relax. You know I don't stand on ceremony. No, Mao Mao thought, this was an appropriate time for an apology. Nonetheless, what Aduo had said teased at something in her memory. What was it? What was it? She tried to think back. Something that had happened in the fortress? Or perhaps before that? Before that, in the rear palace? Or at the medical office? No, no. It must have been. Mao Mao smacked the table. The clinic. What about the clinic? What's happened to it? Just before being kidnapped from the rear palace, Mao Mao had been at the clinic. That was where she'd seen it, a book on the bookshelf. An encyclopedia. About insects. She was nothing if not thorough. Mao Mao pictured the young woman she would not see again and smiled. The idea that she'd found the one possible moment to show Mao Mao what she'd shown her overpowered the pain and made her smile wider. With Shisui's grinning, mischievous face in her mind, Mao Mao gave the table a hearty smack. The clinic had been temporarily closed, Mao Mao was told. It was possible that not all the women who worked there had been privy to the escape plan, but any who had been were guilty of a serious crime, and Chen Luo's crime was the most serious of them all. She'd attempted to commit suicide, but had been stopped and arrested. Still, the rear palace couldn't go on without the clinic, and so it had been reopened, albeit with a eunuch overseer. Everything that had been at the facility at the time of Mao Mao's kidnapping, however, had been confiscated, including the encyclopedia. "Is this what you're looking for?" Jinshi asked, handing her a book. He'd evidently gotten the day off. Outside the apothecary shop, Gao Shun accepted a cup of tea from one of the apprentices. "If I may," Mao Mao said, taking the volume and flipping the pages until she found the place with the most marginal notes. She opened the book slowly, and a sheet covered in writing fell out. She set the book on the floor so that Jinshi could see it, then gently picked up the fallen sheet. "Yes, this is it." The sheet was covered in detailed illustrations of insects. They all looked similar, and as the caption read "grasshoppers," that was probably what they were. Some of the illustrations showed the entire bug, while others were close studies of the legs or wings. There were even some colors, though they were a little faded. The illustrations seemed to be divided into two broad categories, with perhaps a third if one were being precise. Mao Mao outlined them as she read through the text. "I gather this is a grasshopper's normal appearance," she said, pointing to a picture daubed with green. It was hard to tell from the full-body illustrations, but the wing studies made it appear the wings of these insects were a bit shorter than the other two types. "And this is the kind that are expected to proliferate this year," she continued. "It's this variety that causes a plague of insects." Jinshi was perfectly capable of reading the text himself, but Mao Mao still wanted to say it out loud. That helped the information lodge in her mind and made it easier to remember. Jinshi didn't stop her, perhaps he had the same idea. The brown-colored grasshopper had longer wings than the green one. Finally Mao Mao indicated the illustration in the center, whose size was in between the green and brown grasshoppers, its color likewise a blend of the two. "And the text speculates that these may have been the cause of the limited crop damage that occurred last year. In other words, a transitional stage to the brown grasshopper. So it appears. Under certain circumstances, the grasshopper's coloration and the shape of their wings changed. This change took place over the course of several generations, their number increasing with each successive brood. As to whether their bodies changed because of the increased population, or whether the population increased because of the changed body shape, the text ventured that it might be the former. In other words, the bugs that caused limited crop damage presaged much more serious destruction later." "You're saying that there's going to be more widespread famine this year?" "Yes, although we can't say just how big the scale will be. Only that if they misjudged the situation, many people could die of hunger. They're just bugs," one might scoff, but sometimes those bugs could block out the sun and consume every crop in sight. Mao Mao, born and raised in the capital, had never seen such a thing, but more than a few of the girls in the pleasure district were farmers' daughters who had been sold when just such a plague had left their families with nothing to eat. And the timing could hardly have been worse. The entire nation was abuzz over the destruction of the Shi clan the previous year. If there were to be a major plague the year after the clan's extermination, it would bode ill for the country as a whole. None of that was what Mao Mao or Jinshi were interested in, however. Rather, what they wanted to know was, if this person had been researching the insect plagues, had he devised a way to stop them? However, none of the notations suggested any uniquely effective chemicals. They only advised that when small-scale crop destruction had occurred, it was crucial to deal with the problem before it advanced to the next stage. To that end, the text enumerated a few possibilities. All of them were close to a human wave strategy. The best thing was to destroy the insects while they were still in the larval stage, and the notes described how to make several insecticides that were deemed to be particularly effective. The ingredients were relatively easy to obtain, no doubt chosen because so much of the chemical would be necessary. If the insects had already matured, the text recommended setting up bonfires, an age-old method of dealing with bugs, particularly in the summer. They simply flew into the fire and burned themselves up. All that, and we didn't really learn anything significant, Mao Mao remarked. I disagree, things could have been much worse had we gone along not knowing any of this. Even just the formula for insecticide can be considered a worthwhile result. Jinshi scratched his head, but then produced a large map from his robe. It depicted the country of Li, from the capital in the center to the province of Shihokoshu in the north, and even the western reaches. Several locations had been marked with circles in scarlet ink. The name of the central area, incidentally, was Keishu. How the name of Shihokoshu, which included the very name of the Shi clan, might change in the future remained to be seen, but for the moment there seemed to be no move to alter it. These are the locations of farming villages that have reported crop damage, Jinshi said. Do you notice anything about them? I'm afraid I'm not sure what I'm supposed to notice, Mao Mao said. She'd heard that crop damage from insects often occurred out on the open plain, and indeed each of the indicated villages was on such a plain. Perhaps being out on the plain gives the grasshoppers room to grow. Perhaps. But there hasn't been serious insect damage in this region in decades. Jinshi swept his finger around a particular part of the map, the northern lands that had formerly belonged to the Shi. The area boasted abundant natural resources and bordered on forests and mountains. Jinshi tapped his finger irritably on the forest. Wouldn't one normally expect a forest to be home to enough birds to eat the bugs? Mao Mao said. Funny you should say that. Jinshi scratched his head awkwardly. Shihokoshu was, in principle, richly forested, but the timber in the area had already been stripped bare. The Empress Regnant had forbidden the untrammeled cutting down of the country's trees, but upon her death, it seemed some of the less scrupulous members of the Shi clan had resumed harvesting timber without informing the capital. They raised the price on what they sold domestically so as not to attract suspicion, and the rest they sold to neighboring nations. The deforestation had continued until the region's natural resources were badly depleted. Let me guess. Thanks to that, there are no more birds, which means nothing to check a plague of insects. It seems a most reasonable guess. Wow. That was depressing. So at least part of Jinshi's despondency could be explained by his dashed hopes for Shihokoshu's timber resources. He'd probably hoped to make up any shortfall in the crop by selling off wood and using the profits to purchase grain, but this pulled the rug out from under that plan. Wait. If he was right, then Mao Mao thought she could take a guess as to why the Empress Regnant had limited timber harvesting in the first place, but she would think about that later. Instead, she looked at the diagrams in the encyclopedia. Then she reviewed the formula for the insecticide several times, then finally stood up. She took a book from the shelf, paged through it, and showed it to Jinshi. I don't think this formula is going to yield enough chemical. I'll prepare something else as well, although it might not be as effective. Then she had another thought. I don't suppose it would be possible to burn off the areas where larvae are found. Depends on the place, I guess. I agree, fire might be the quickest way. She tried to think of any other suggestions. All I can come up with is perhaps forbidding the hunting of sparrows. Sparrows were routinely treated as pests themselves, but they ate insects, and that could prove important. If they could act before the grain ripened, it might be possible to limit the damage. But it seemed likely to provoke protests from those who hunted sparrows for a living. It was hard to say how much destruction might be prevented if all of these ideas were put into practice. Of course, it might be that nothing happened in any case, but if so, it would only be a matter of good fortune. The role of those who practiced politics was to eliminate the possibility of crisis even if people didn't always appreciate what they were doing. A ban on sparrow hunting? Introduce that too suddenly, and you might just have a rebellion on your hands, Jinshi said. Even here in the capital, there were places that specialized in sparrow cuisine. It was a basic dish, you could find it anywhere. Maybe if we had something to replace them with. Mao Mao had a flash of inspiration. What if you were to convince people that grasshopper dishes are all the rage at court? Then people would think the aristocrats were looking for grasshoppers for their food, and more people would catch them. And if the emperor was eating them, the aristocrats who followed his whims would no doubt adopt the habit too. There was just one problem: Jinshi was sitting there frozen, his usually gorgeous countenance ashen. I can't believe this guy, Mao Mao thought. She had half a mind to produce the rest of the simmered grasshoppers right here and now. Jinshi finally moved again, but it was only to look up, press his fingers to his brow, and groan. He was, it seemed, conflicted. At last he said, perhaps we could consider that a last resort. If there aren't too many of them, it won't come up, Mao Mao said, but she was a little disappointed. She could at least tell, though, that Jinshi was more set on doing something than he had been before. Apparently, he hated the idea of eating grasshoppers just that much. A bit of a smile came over Mao Mao's face, causing Jinshi to freeze again. Ahem. Master Jinshi. Yes, what is it? He managed, stuttering just a little. Won't you have a meal before you go back? Mao Mao said politely. Now she was grinning. So it was that Jinshi decided to have dinner before he left. The apothecary shop was, of course, too small for proper meal service, so Mao Mao found an unused room for them. Naturally, she produced the remaining grasshoppers. She didn't actually intend to make him eat them, it was just a bit of a joke. She had every intention of taking them away again the moment Jinshi seemed even the least bit upset by her jest. And then there was Grams, glaring very pointedly at her. However, say ah. Mao Mao grabbed one in her chopsticks and pretended to feed it to him with uncharacteristic gusto. Jinshi watched her silently. Okay, maybe that's enough, she thought, but just then, Jinshi, with only some hesitation, took a bite of the grasshopper Mao Mao had offered him as a joke. She felt herself grimace, and she wasn't even the one eating it. To watch Jinshi knit his brow and chew away was to feel that one was seeing something that shouldn't be seen. It was different, in its way, from the time she'd witnessed him made up like a woman, but still, it felt like something that shouldn't exist in this world. Everyone else present seemed to have the same sense, they looked as if they had been struck by a collective lightning bolt. Gao Shun's hands were shaking. The apprentice who'd brought the meal looked like she might burst into tears, as if she'd dropped her favorite doll in the mud. Zhou Yu, who'd come along to snatch some food, was frowning profoundly and shaking his head as if to say, "This is bad news." Even the madam wore a look of distaste. Jinshi ignored them all as he chewed and swallowed. He still looked profoundly disturbed, but nonetheless he turned beseeching eyes on Mao Mao. Kanji. Ahem, right away, sir. She held out the bowl of kanji to him, but Jinshi made no move to take it. Instead he looked from the kanji to Mao Mao and back. It's gonna get cold. Mao Mao picked out some lotus, wondering what Jinshi was trying to get at. Maybe he didn't like the ingredients. Whatever the case, all he was doing was staring at the porridge. Then, finally, Jinshi practically ate the lotus out of her hand. Mao Mao didn't say anything, but she thought, what is he, an infant? She scooped up a bit of kanji with the lotus, it looked in danger of spilling over, so she brought it to his mouth and he ate greedily. Scowling, Mao Mao next picked up a grasshopper with her chopsticks. Jinshi frowned, too, but he took a bite of the insect nonetheless. Gao Shun could be heard to inhale sharply. There was a faint clatter as well, it was the apprentice, curling up on the floor on the verge of tears. Zhou patted her back consolingly. Mao Mao wondered if the sight was really that shocking. Maybe it was too much for the eyes of children. I'm gonna get her out of here, Freckles. And mister, you oughta take some responsibility for yourself. Jinchi was too busy chewing the grasshopper to reply. He certainly didn't look like he was enjoying the task, but when Mao Mao held out another to him, he obediently ate. Zhou led the little girl out of the room. By now there was snot pouring from her nose. I've done a bad thing, Mao Mao thought. Jinchi, being as beautiful as he was, tried not to show his face more than was necessary even at the verdigrease house. The madam didn't want the courtesans seeing him, not if he wasn't going to provide any work for them. Thus, it was the little mute girl, the younger of the two sisters from the poor quarter, who'd brought his meal. She hadn't been formally sold, but rather than send her back to her father, they decided to let her stay at the verdigrease house. There was just one catch: the madam, needless to say, wasn't nearly altruistic enough to give free room and board, so she had the girl effectively doing the work of an apprentice. The child had a distinct timid streak, but again, if the alternative was to go back to her father, then she would rise to the work. Zhou, who saw himself as king of the brats, frequently interceded on behalf of the nervous apprentice. She's my loyal henchman, after all, he explained, as if they were in some sort of gang together. Jinchi, who at length had successfully swallowed the grasshopper, looked at Mao Mao again. Yeah, okay, she thought, and brought the lotus to his mouth once more. After Jinchi had gone home, Zhou appeared, now finished protecting the apprentice. Hey, Freckles! To Mao Mao's surprise, he was carrying a brush and some paper. Where'd you get that paper? Oh, Grams gave it to me. That tight-fisted old bag. She counted every coin that came into her hands. Mao Mao highly doubted she'd simply give away something as luxurious as paper. Hey, all I know is, she said I could have it. Anyway, sit down over there. What for? Mao Mao wanted to clean up the shop and get home already, not indulge the demands of some kid. She was about to try to shoo him away when she heard a weathered voice from behind her. Bah, listen to Zhou sleep here tonight. It would just be a lot of trouble to have to get another fire going when you get home, no? I've even got pajamas ready for you. Grams, what's going on here? Did seeing something that disturbing drive you insane? Confronted with the madam acting nice, the words just sort of slipped out. Grams's knuckles struck Mao Mao's head with a speed one would never have expected from such an old woman. Despite having one foot in the grave, the old crone was still taller than Mao Mao, and the blow came down hard enough to send her reeling. Don't question me. I laid out a bedroll in the room we used earlier. Take a bath before you go to sleep, it should still be warm. This smells fishy, Mao Mao thought, but it didn't stop her from going to the room. As Zhou spread out his paper, the madam solicitously prepared ink. So fishy. Mao Mao's sisters Pairin and Joka were there, looking on, although Mao Mao couldn't fathom why. They were both taking tea today. The other courtesans were busy entertaining customers. Grams, don't you have to look after the incense? Mao Mao asked. Oh, Yukio's taking care of it for me. It'll be fine. Mao Mao was still puzzling over why they were all in this room when there was work to be done when Zhou finished getting his brush ready and just looked at her. What? She said. Tell me what kind of guy you like, Freckles, he said. Excuse me. Of all the things she'd thought he might say, she hadn't expected anything that stupid. She took the pajamas out of the basket and started to get ready to bathe. The madam, however, tugged on her sleeve to stop her. Come on, be serious, she said. Mao Mao, my dear, you mustn't argue with our lovely madam, Pairin said. Even she was getting in on it. Joka was smoking a pipe with a disaffected expression. Customers would be coming to the brothel at this hour, but this room was used especially for those who wanted to be discreet, and the chances of anyone stumbling across them were minimal. Even the madam didn't seem disposed to grumble about Mau Mau's rudeness. "Come on, Freckles, cough it up." "What kind? Do you like 'em tall? With lots of muscles?" "I can't believe I'm doing this," Mau Mau thought, but she decided that it would be best just to play along. She sat on the mattress and said, "I prefer them not to be too tall." Her feet were cold, so she stuck them under the covers. "Huh. Okay," Yu said. "And I'd rather they have a bit of meat on their bones, as opposed to being too thin." With a man who was too tall, the diminutive Mau Mau would strain her neck looking up at him. And if he was too scrawny, people would think she wasn't feeding him, and she didn't want that. "What about facial hair?" "I don't mind it, but not too thick." A mustache or beard could be seen as manly, but to Mau Mau's mind it was just as likely to communicate filth. She was always annoyed when she saw a man who'd neglected his grooming so badly that he still had rice in his beard. "Let's talk about faces. Soft, not sharp." She didn't want someone with the intense, cunning look of a fox. In fact, she hated it. Such people, in her opinion, could die in a fire. So soft their eyebrows droop. "You can take artistic license on that one." "About like this, then," Yu said, holding up the papers so they could see it. "Gosh, a little boring, isn't he?" said Pyrin, who liked bullier men. "A little sheltered, judging by that face," said the madam, unimpressed. "Wow. No way," was all Joka had to say. Although she was one of the three princesses, there was one major catch that could make her tough to deal with as a courtesan: she absolutely hated men. She dismissed most of them out of hand. Finally, Mau Mau got a good look at the portrait, and went completely silent. "What's the matter?" the madam asked, eyeing her. "Nothing. I was just struck by the resemblance." "Resemblance? Mau Mau, have you got your eye on a special someone?" Pyrin teased, but the madam looked no more pleased than before. True, she didn't hate him, as they said. "Who is this man, exactly?" the madam inquired. "Well, man might not quite be the right word. He was a eunuch, after all. The picture. It looks exactly like the physician at the rear palace." There was a long beat in which everyone registered this rather dispiriting answer. Then they all promptly left the room. "What a letdown," said Pyrin, who'd been all set to dig into some talk of romance. Now completely disenchanted, she was the first to leave. She glanced at Mau Mau as she went, but Mau Mau pretended not to notice. Then the madam exited, likewise looking as if nothing could interest her less. Yu, meanwhile, headed to the bath. At last only Joka was left with Mau Mau, smoking her pipe. The older woman opened a window, letting in a breath of cold air. A half-moon floated in the sky, which was as dark as a pool of spilled ink and speckled with stars. From their vantage point they could see other windows in which were the silhouettes of men and women. A succession of romances being born this evening here in this brothel, destined to fade with the morning light. Joka looked at Mau Mau, purple smoke drifting from between her lips. "I can't say I don't sympathize with you. Men. You never know when their feelings will change. And if they're powerful, they're only that much worse." She set down her pipe, the movement diffident and yet beautiful. Joka was the youngest of the three princesses, and customers deeply valued the education she'd been given as a woman with potential. Some claimed that if you could keep up with Joka's conversation, you could expect to pass the civil service examinations, and her regulars included rich young men who hoped to take the tests. "If you were more like our older sister Pyrin, I wouldn't stop you. She's a bit of a devil lady. But you're different." Pyrin gets impatient, "But I wish she'd understand that you're not her. If anything, Mau Mau, you're more like me." Mau Mau thought she understood what Joka was getting at. It was almost certainly. "You'll never find some fine prince whose heart will never change. That's one lesson you can't escape here. What does trust ever get you? Joka picked up her pipe and settled the ashes inside, then she packed in some more tobacco and took a coal from the brazier. White smoke enveloped her. When you come down to it, I'm a whore, and you're a whore's daughter. That was the reality of it. Mau Mau looked at the ashes dropped in the brazier and felt a slight furrow form in her brow. Sis, don't you think that's enough smoking? It's fine, now and again. The thing about these somber bureaucrats is, they hate to see a woman with a pipe. When she wasn't entertaining customers, at least, she was going to do what she liked. As if to prove the point, she took another long drag on her pipe and breathed the smoke out into the sky. Chapter 7, The White Snake Immortal. It all started with a story related by a customer. Well, at least that explains why there've been so few patrons lately, Mau Mau's older sister Mei Mei said, reclining on her side as she placed a ghost stone on a board. The apprentice assigned to her sat on the other side of the board, looking nervous as she set some stones on it. It seemed they were working life and death strategy problems. Big, important men can't get enough of strange and novel things, Joka said, breathing out some pipe smoke. Mau Mau, meanwhile, was preparing her tools. Her sisters had asked her to do moxibustion for them. These women's lives were hard, and sometimes they needed a chance to relax and let off steam. Hence days like today, when they had no real work to do. Mei Mei said it was the man she'd been playing Go with the night before who told her. He claimed there was someone even more striking than the three princesses of the Verdigris house around, a young woman who seemed to be a mystical immortal. I guess we're too old for them these days, Joka nearly spat. And to think, they used to treat us like jewels. Yes, of course, Mau Mau said placatingly as she encouraged Joka to lie on her stomach and began placing herbs in specific spots around her body before lighting them. Ah, Joka moaned sensually. Her toes nearly curled. Mau Mau wished she could reassure her sister that she was still more than woman enough. He said her hair is pure white, Mei Mei told them. And if that were it, well, you might say, so she's a girl with white hair. But he said her eyes are bright red, as well. White hair and red eyes. That was indeed unusual, Mau Mau acknowledged with a nod. Finished with Joka, she began to place the moxa on Mei Mei. Mei Mei stretched a slim leg out from under the hem of her robe. Mau Mau rolled the fabric aside carefully so it wouldn't get scorched, then lit the herbs. Not just white hair, but red eyes too? So she's an albino? Mau Mau asked. Probably, Mei Mei said, she and Joka both nodding. The apprentice holding the ghost stones, not quite able to follow, tugged on Mau Mau's sleeve. It was the girl who'd nearly been reduced to tears by the sight of Jinchi eating the grasshoppers. Her name, Mau Mau had learned, was Zulin. Her older sister's name was similar, but the older girl intended to change her name to symbolize her break with her father. And Mau Mau had no intention of bothering to remember a name that was only going to change soon. Mau Mau gave the girl a look, but when she saw the child flinch back, she gave in. Very rarely, a person is born without skin color. Their skin and hair are both white, and their eyes look red because you can see the blood inside them. We call them albinos. It happened in animals too. White snakes and foxes were considered auspicious, and venerated as gods, but what about people? Mau Mau had heard of a far land in which albino children were said to be considered panaceas and were sometimes eaten. She didn't give the story any credence, though. Mau Mau's old man Luomen had told her that the white hair and skin represented nothing more than a lack of coloration, otherwise, albinos were the same as anyone else. Once, just one time, Mau Mau had caught a white snake. It was one of the strangest creatures she'd ever encountered. As for this albino woman, it seemed fascination with her had led people to treat her as an immortal. In other words, she was taken as a good sign rather than a bad one. Those pompous assholes will get tired of her soon enough, Joka said. I don't know, Mei Mei replied, sticking out her other leg. They claim she really can use immortal arts. That caused Mao Mao to cock an eyebrow. According to Mei Mei's story, this woman could read people's minds and transform metals. That sounded as preposterous as anything Mao Mao had ever heard, but fools and their money were soon parted, especially fools with a lot of money. The immortal had started in a small exhibition space, but now she was renting out the capital's biggest theater. She put on only one show each night, and the moneyed men who usually patronized the pleasure quarter were lining up to see her instead. The ladies here might well complain. And when one of their customers finally did show up after a prolonged absence, all he could talk about was the unearthly beauty of this female immortal and her incredible powers. Hardly the stuff to light the fires of romance. The drop of 20% in the brothel's income was enough to make the madam smack her pipe on whatever was nearby. The middle-class courtesans were seeing as many customers as ever, but the Verdigris house was a high-class brothel. It lived and died on whether it could attract the best customers. Who needs to see a show more than once? Mao Mao muttered. She'd intended the remark for herself, but Yukio, the chief manservant, replied, "Oh, you'd be surprised." Yukio, a man of about 40, had had his hands full recently looking after both Joyu and Seizan. It looked like he had finally managed to catch a breath just before the lanterns went up for the night. He was munching on a big meat bun in lieu of a late lunch. Mao Mao offered him some tea, brewed from leftover leaves. He said thanks and took a sip to wash down his food. "You know about Liandanshu, right? You're bringing this up now." Liandanshu was an art which sought to help a person achieve a state of immortality. It had been enough to make Mao Mao's eyes sparkle when her old man had told her about it, but he'd been quick to add that she must never attempt it. It could be a dubious practice indeed. "You're saying she pretends to have the power of immortality?" "Maybe. She's got that unusual appearance, and they say she can read people's minds." Ah! The great and powerful might arrive skeptical, but when this woman told them what they were thinking, how must they feel? Any sense of being made a fool of might be transmuted, as it were, into faith. And that might convince them that some elixir of immortality really did exist. But if that isn't the stupidest thing I've ever heard. Mao Mao did know of someone who, after many attempts to create an elixir of immortality, had succeeded in producing a resurrection drug. Quite an achievement, as a physician, but the side effects still left much to be desired. Mao Mao clenched her fists. She knew it was pointless to wish that physician were here, but if he were, he might have been able to give them a better idea of how to prevent any damage from the plague of insects. The disaster wasn't yet upon them. If they could do something now, they might be able to change things. Jinchi and his immediate acquaintances were busy racking their brains for any possible preventative measures, but the rest of the nation's important people took the matter lightly at best. Mao Mao wondered about this woman's alleged abilities. So, what? She claims to have an elixir of immortality, and that's how she attracts customers. No idea, Yukio said. I just got wind of what the bigwig's bodyguards were saying. He stuffed the rest of his meat bun into his mouth, washing it down with the rest of the tea. It was time to go light the lanterns. If you're so curious, why don't you go see the show? You think I'd pay that much to see that little? Beg someone to take you, then. He winked amicably and left. Beg who? Mao Mao thought, grunting in disgust. Nobody has that much time on their hands. Several days later, Mao Mao had an unexpected visitor. Of all the people I thought might show up, I never imagined him, Yukio said, scratching his chin. He was frequently at the Verdigris house these days to look after the kids. No sooner had he brought the visitor to Mao Mao than he disappeared again. Yes. Of all the people, Mao Mao said. I'll thank you to be a little more polite, the visitor huffed. He was a diminutive man with round spectacles framing sharp, fox-like eyes, and he carried an abacus. His name was La Hanyes, of the La clan. He was the nephew and adopted son of the eccentric strategist, and he had come to invite Mao Mao to see the infamous show. He even had some friends to come with them. I didn't know you had any interest in entertainment, said Mao Mao, who'd produced tepid tea steeped from some leftover leaves, purely for form's sake. When all the world seems interested, how could I not be intrigued? La Han slid his glasses up his nose pointedly. Beside him stood a man Mao Mao didn't recognize, smiling broadly. Probably not quite 30, he had delicate features and a composed expression. Mao Mao gave him a quick but polite dip of the head before returning to her conversation with La Han. They say this albino woman is quite beautiful, he remarked. Mao Mao knew full well that La Han had no special interest in beautiful things. Unlike ordinary men, he claimed to see beauty in the form of numbers. Evidently the adopted son of the eccentric was rather unusual himself. And you're inviting me, why? Don't tell me it doesn't interest you. He was right about that, at least. But what did La Han stand to gain by bringing her along? Mao Mao glanced around. If you're worried about my father, he's not here. And he won't be there. You mean it? Mao Mao wouldn't have put it past La Han to use her as a sacrificial lamb to curry favor with the eccentric strategist. I mean it. However, one of his subordinates is with us. La Han indicated the man beside him. Mao Mao scowled before she could stop herself. Don't look at me like that, the young man said, wounded. Like he was about to say the name, but with one look at Mao Mao's face he quickly covered it with a cough. Ahem. May I, refer to him as the strategist? Mao Mao's expression returned to something that bore looking at directly, causing the man to breathe a sigh of relief. I'm the strategist's subordinate. My name is Rikyasan. Mao Mao, she said after a beat. Yes, I've heard of you. Mao Mao gave La Han a good, hard stare. Why wasn't the eccentric here himself? Why send someone in his place? The frizzy-haired, bespectacled man spread his arms helplessly. It doesn't look like my father will be leaving his house for a while. It didn't seem like this fact made his life easy. Huh. That remark sounded significant, but Mao Mao didn't foresee anything good for her coming of pursuing it. I still don't know why you're inviting me along. La Han never did anything without calculating the potential benefit. He was the only person Mao Mao knew who could give the old madam a run for her money for sheer miserliness. There are going to be some dealings with the West coming up, and we were thinking of asking this troupe to perform for them. Keep going. There will be women among the delegation, you see, and I thought it would be wise to get a woman's perspective on the performance. Bullshit, Mao Mao shot back. Yes, Rikyasan was there, but she didn't care. She had no intention of minding her manners just because one of the strategist's lackeys was around. La Han spread his hands again, more deliberately this time. Frankly, the gesture was annoying. She suspected he'd only given her that excuse to see if she'd call his bluff. Suddenly, Rikyasan broke in. Actually, he looked uneasy. Anxious, even. Not sure how to explain himself. My superior. The strategist. He let slip that, he is indeed curious about that. It's that simple. Rikyasan, motivated by what had apparently been a passing remark, had begun to investigate this troupe of entertainers. He found no basis for what the strategist had said, unless it was the man's own vaguely supernatural instincts. But I did hear a rumor about them that made me wonder, he said, and then with a look of wonder, he proceeded to relate the story he'd heard. I hope this doesn't turn out to be more trouble, Mao Mao thought as she pulled on a cotton-padded jacket, an excellent item she'd gotten for free at the clothing shop. The color was louder than she would usually have preferred, but she wasn't about to turn down free clothes nor fail to use them. Suitably warm, she went outside to the waiting carriage. It was already dark, and snowflakes drifted through the sky. She'd instructed Yukio to give Joyu dinner. If she'd told the kid where she was going, he would only have demanded to come with. Shall we be off? Rikyasan asked, politely opening the door of the carriage for her as if for a princess. La Han was already seated inside. He was wearing a different pair of spectacles from normal, perhaps his idea of dressing up. Rikyu-san sat down beside him, and then the driver cracked the reins. The theater where the alleged mystic was performing was on the eastern edge of the central part of the capital. Located near the high-class residences, this was the poshest part of a city whose every corner bristled with shops. This building, though, was usually used for performing theater troupes. A single woman, even a supposed immortal, putting on a show by herself was most unusual. She seems to be one popular mystic, Mao Mao thought. When they disembarked the carriage, a whole crowd of people was already lining up. A man was taking coins and leading customers inside. The woman was known as Pai Niang Niang, the White Lady, after her appearance. It was a rather sumptuous name for a simple performer. "What's this about?" Mao Mao asked, though she hadn't intended to say it out loud. All of the patrons were dressed in finery, but most of them had covered their faces with veils or weird masks, only a few going without. La Han covered Mao Mao's head with a veil that was pleasant to the touch, and then he, Rikyu-san, and the brawny man serving as their bodyguard all put on masks that hid half their faces. "It's the done thing," La Han explained. "Things go so much better when you have a little something to give you a pretext for pretending you don't recognize anyone." In other words, some of the rich and important people drawn to this show might enjoy themselves a little too much. Or perhaps this was part of the allure of the carnival atmosphere, the chance to give yourself over to the sense of the uncanny. She must have sponsors, Mao Mao thought when she saw what the tickets cost. It would be tough to rent out such a fine theater at these prices. Even most full theatrical shows were backed by sponsors. A one-person show by a traveling performer would need them that much more. Meanwhile, Mao Mao could hardly notice something having to do with economics that escaped La Han. She could see him glancing around, the abacus working in his head. Inside, there was a stage, with a couple dozen tables set up in front of it. The ceiling was vaulted so that there was a decent view from the second floor. The place could probably hold 100 or more spectators. There were buildings at the rear palace that were bigger and permitted more people, but this one had been designed to ensure that everyone had some kind of view of the stage. In deference to the audience, the pillars and rafters were carved with delicate, lovely patterns. A huge lantern hung from the ceiling, bathing the space in a murky glow. Mao Mao and the others were seated on the left side, 2 rows from the stage. The tables seated 4, meaning that with their bodyguard, they had the perfect number. The front and center seats were occupied by a corpulent man and the young woman hanging off his arm. The center section is the most popular. "Drives the price to outrageous levels," La Han informed her, obviously annoyed. But the seats they were in couldn't have been cheap either. It must have been a source of irritation for such a penny pincher. "I think we could have stood to be a little farther back," Rikyu-san said. True, the best seats implied something about the power and wealth of their occupants. It was clear that the man in the front and center spot had plenty of money, if nothing else. Mao Mao seemed to recall a merchant who'd been living large in the pleasure quarter recently, someone not too dissimilar to him. Almost as soon as they sat down, smiling waitresses accosted them with drinks, and some baked cakes were provided as a snack. An unusual combination, Mao Mao observed. She gave the drink an experimental sniff. "It's alcohol. Not going to drink?" La Han asked. In fact, Mao Mao liked alcohol. But she wanted to have a clear head when she saw this white lady. "Later. Or would you prefer I check it for poison?" she said. "Don't bother." La Han likewise set his drink on the table. He wasn't much better at holding his liquor than the eccentric strategist was. Rikyu-san, taking his cue from La Han, showed no sign of touching his refreshments. "You don't want to drink?" Mao Mao asked him. "It wouldn't do for me to be the only one who ended up less than sober." And of course the bodyguard wouldn't imbibe, although his mouth, not hidden by his mask, revealed his disappointment at the fact. A quick glance around suggested the alcohol was quite tasty, and judging by the number of people taking bites of the snack cakes, the two went well together. Mao Mao, though thinking Rikyu-san didn't have to be quite so considerate, directed her attention to the stage. A white mist drifted through the dim room. At the sound of a gong, the main act appeared on the stage like a beam of light. Her skin was white, her clothes were white, and her white hair wasn't tied up but was allowed to cascade down her back. Against this field of white, her red lips and eyes stood out starkly. As the sound of the gong echoed around the room, the white lady moved to the center of the stage, where a beautiful desk waited for her. She stood in front of it, then picked up a piece of paper lying on it and showed it to the audience. It contained a diagram showing the stage and the desk itself. A man dressed in white came on stage. His hair was black, but otherwise his appearance was much like the lady's. He was obviously her assistant. He took the diagram from her and stuck it to a wall on stage. Then he turned toward it and tossed something at it, some sort of throwing weapon, perhaps. The long, thin object pierced the paper and stuck. The wall had obviously been prepared ahead of time to make it easy to stick the knife in it. There was now a hole in the paper. It was, in fact, precisely in the location of the second row on the left. "Who, may we ask, is sitting in this seat?" the assistant inquired. "That's us, isn't it?" Lahan asked Mao Mao. "Yes, sir, it would seem so," she replied. "What should we do about it?" "I'm afraid I don't know, sir." Lahan had scant interest in the subject, and Rikusen hardly seemed like the type to clown around on stage. Their guard, of course, was there to, well, guard them. "How about you go up?" Lahan said, pointing at Mao Mao. "It's a perfect chance to see her at work up close." Mao Mao was quiet for a moment, wondering what she should do, but she decided this was an opportunity she couldn't miss. "I'll be back in a few minutes, then," she said, and walked up on stage. The white lady seemed even more brilliant under the flickering light of the lantern, her skin so pale that the veins were visible beneath it. This was clearly not someone simply pretending to be albino by dusting themselves with powder. "Please write down a number." "Any number," she said, her voice barely audible. The man beside her repeated the instruction loudly enough for the entire theater to hear. The lady continued, "Please don't let me see what you write. Fold up the paper when you're done, small enough that no one can see what's on it." Then she and her assistant both turned their backs on Mao Mao. Mao Mao took the brush that was provided and began to write. It was already loaded with ink, so much that it was almost difficult to write with. The slightly unpleasant feeling of the ink suggested they hadn't gone out of their way to get particularly high-quality writing implements. There was a pad on the desk so the ink didn't soak through. They didn't have to make the ink so tacky, Mao Mao thought. It felt almost gritty. Just one of those weird things that bothered her. When she had written a number, she folded the paper up and said, "I'm done." The white lady and her assistant turned back around. The man took the desk off stage and replaced it with something brought in on a clattering cart. It looked like a box with a collection of strange cylinders shoved into the bottom. 100 cylinders, arranged in 10 rows and 10 columns. "May I ask you to push the paper into one of those tubes?" the white lady said, and then she and the man turned around again. Mao Mao didn't think that was really necessary. The tubes weren't visible either from the stage or the spectator seats. Nonetheless, she balled the paper up even smaller and pressed it into one of the tubes. The paper was soft, but the pipe was narrow and she had to work a bit to do it. With a good shove, she managed it, though she didn't envy the person who had to pull it out again. When she was done, she placed a thin veil over the box so the tubes couldn't be seen. Then the lady's assistant took the box, moving it to another desk in a corner of the stage. The veil, thin and light as it was, billowed as he went. "It is ready," he announced, and immediately there was a thunderous clang of the gong. It caught Mao Mao by surprise, and she was glad she was wearing a veil herself so no one could see her eyes widen. As for the white lady, she smiled and held out her hand. Mao Mao took the hint and held out her own hand. She felt pale, chilly fingers grasp her wrist. This time there was a jangling of bells. The white lady stared intently at Mao Mao. "Ah! She must have poor eyesight, Mao Mao thought, noticing that the lady's eyes occasionally flitted in different directions. Her eyes had no pigment, either. Life must be tough for her. As Mao Mao was getting lost in thought, though, the white lady said, "The number you wrote is 7. Mao Mao jumped. "That's correct." The red lips twisted into a leer. When Mao Mao met those crimson eyes, they made her think of the white snake she'd caught once long ago. It, too, had red eyes and white skin. When she had tried to roast it, her old man had gotten mad at her. He'd said it was a messenger of the gods and she couldn't eat it. Mao Mao knew it was no divine messenger. It was an animal that happened to have white skin for entirely mundane reasons. But her father, to her frustration, could sometimes be like that, bringing up illogical arguments at the most unlikely times. Just as Mao Mao threatened to be swallowed up by those large, round eyes, the gong sounded again. Maybe it was the fog in the room that made her feel so warm, made her head hurt. She felt a flash of irritation at the sensation that a fly was buzzing around her ears, but then the white lady spoke again. "The third row from the top, second from the left." Mao Mao paused. "Well." The assistant removed the veil to reveal to the audience what was in the box. He took the tube 3 rows down from the top and 2 from the left and drove a thin stick through it. Pop! The paper Mao Mao had shoved into it came flying out. The man unfolded it to reveal the number 7 in Mao Mao's own writing, of course. Mao Mao went back to her seat, pondering what could be going on. The room was full of boisterous, cheerful voices. Much of the audience seemed to be pleasantly drunk. La Han and the others, though, were waiting studiously for Mao Mao to return. "So tell me, what was that?" La Han asked, now full of enthusiasm. "Search me." "Wait. Did she slip a little coin into your hand, perchance?" "Unlike some of us, I don't work that way." "Well, neither do I. There's no beauty in it." This man made no sense to Mao Mao. He adored even the smallest coins, yet he claimed there was a distinction between beauty and impurity in them. But she noticed Rikusan chuckling to himself. "You can see I've got nothing," Mao Mao said, opening her hands and rolling up her sleeves to prove she hadn't been bought off. "Did someone see you, then?" "I really doubt it." Only the white lady and her assistant had been up on stage with her. Mao Mao didn't think anyone had observed her writing the number, and which pipe she'd put the paper into had been obscured by the cloth. But maybe, she thought. She glanced toward the stage, which was bathed in the uneven glow of the lantern hanging from the ceiling. She'd thought perhaps there was a mirror in which the performers could see which number she'd written, but it didn't seem to be the case. It looked like it would have been hard to hang anything of the sort from the ceiling, and anyway, you would need to have something of the sort in the first place. Above all, though, the white lady's eyes were too bad for that. Everything more than a shaku in front of her probably looked hazy. Mao Mao was still contemplating it when the next part of the performance began. A new desk was brought out and a variety of utensils arranged on it. The lady used a pair of chopsticks to pick up a small, thin piece of metal from among them. She chose a dish as well. Her assistant took the metal and the dish, set them on a tray, and began walking around the theater with them. The piece of metal appeared to be no more than a sheet of polished bronze. The dish, meanwhile, was deeply recessed so that the liquid in it wouldn't spill. The assistant skipped the second floor evidently. He didn't have time to make his way all the way up there, provoking a few shouts of protest from above. But that, in Mao Mao's opinion, was just what you got for sitting in the cheap seats. When the man returned to the stage, the white lady took the metal sheet and the dish back from him. Then she placed the metal in the dish and placed the dish in a fire that had been lit almost without anyone noticing. She began chanting what sounded like a spell of some kind, then started to dance. In the gloomy, misty room, her entire body seemed to shine. When the dance was over, the lady took the chopsticks and removed the piece of metal from the fire. The colors changed. The reddish hue of the bronze had become a pure silver. Several people in the front row exclaimed with wonder. The bronze turned into silver, someone shouted. What? Really? Those in the back couldn't quite see what was happening on stage, but they could see other people's reactions, and pressed forward with interest. The guards managed to keep anyone from mounting the stage, but that was plenty close enough to see what was going on. The lady was bathing the metal in some sort of liquid, then wiping it dry with a cloth. This time she exposed it directly to the fire. The shouting grew louder, the silvers changed to gold. Indeed, the silver sheet had turned to shimmering gold. The lady shook it with the chopsticks, getting the heat out as she placed it on the dish. Her assistant held it up so everyone could see the shining gold clearly. Are you able to explain that? Lahan asked Mao Mao, wiping his spectacles. Mao Mao smirked. Yes, later. For now, let's enjoy the show. Her eyes were sparkling. In fact, she was loath to look away from the performance on stage. With Lahan, her voice took on an edge that she normally reserved for use in the pleasure quarter. It might have sounded a little strange to Rikusen, but considering that he served someone very strange indeed, maybe he was willing not to let it bother him. Mao Mao had other things on her mind, anyway. This is fascinating, she thought, so eager to see the panoply of unusual techniques on display that she almost forgot to blink. The woman might not be an immortal, but it was clear they couldn't dismiss her out of hand. The White Lady proceeded to show them a wide variety of intriguing entertainments. She placed a whetstone on a piece of paper and recited a spell over it, shortly after which they burst into flames. She produced butterflies seemingly out of thin air, and as they were flying away they, too, appeared to incinerate themselves, turning to ash in mid-flight. Each display earned a chorus of oohs and ahs from the audience. Finally, the lady held up a shimmering silver liquid. With every eye in the house fixed on the mysterious substance, she poured it into a small cup and drank it down. Mao Mao almost choked, barely resisting the urge to jump out of her seat. Thankfully she stopped herself before she got to her feet, and instead focused intently on the lady. I hope you've had another enjoyable evening at my show, the lady said with a smile, and then descended the stage. The audience members, meanwhile, continued to fill the theater with excited chatter about what they'd just witnessed. Some people's eyes flickered as if with flames, while others looked adoringly at the spot where the immortal had just been. Only Mao Mao's group seemed less engaged than the rest, perhaps in part because they hadn't indulged in the wine. She certainly is something special, Rikusen remarked, finally reaching for his cup. Mao Mao, though, instinctively stopped him, looking at him uneasily. Is something the matter? He asked. Yes, Mao Mao said, and took her own cup in her hand. She sniffed it, then put a single drop of the wine on her skin. When she saw how it behaved, she lapped up the smallest mouthful of the drink. It's mixed with something, she said. There wasn't much actual alcohol in it. It was closer to juice, very drinkable, but it also had several other, conflicting flavors. It seemed the drinks had been adulterated with several other substances, perhaps including some salt. It's not poisonous, Mao Mao said. But in spite of how modest the alcohol content was, it seemed likely to pack a punch. That was all there was to it. Then there was the wavering lantern light. The darkened room. The eerie mist and phantasmal woman on stage. The strange phenomena the audience had witnessed. Well, now. This was all more than enough to inspire blind faith in someone. Mao Mao wondered how many of the audience members had been moved to exactly that. As she mulled it over, she continued to sip at her drink. It's definitely a little salty, she thought. It would be better without, she reflected, and that was when it hit her. She plunged a finger into her drink, then ran it over the tabletop, using the juice like ink. What are you doing? Lahan asked. You wanted to know what's going on? Here it is. Mao Mao looked around at them. If that stuff's like this, then that must have some trick to it too. She wished she'd looked around more closely when she was on stage. Had there been something there? It had been mistier up there than in the seats, warmer, making her head hurt and interfering with her concentration in some odd way. Mist. Fog. She suspected it was steam, maybe from something being boiled behind the stage. That would explain the heat too. But why did it make her head hurt, then? She'd felt like there had been a fly buzzing around her ears. What was that? Just as she felt she was getting an inkling of what it might be, she caught a glimpse of the white lady in the wings of the stage. Mao Mao stuck her fingers in her mouth, closed her lips, and blew. What are you whistling for? What a base way to show your appreciation. La Han was looking at her with narrowed eyes. Mao Mao's whistle hadn't been very loud, while the chatter around her was noisy. The sound shouldn't have carried far. And yet, she saw the lady look around when she whistled. Ha! Now I get it. Mao Mao grinned and started in on the snack cakes. It was cold outside. They could easily have waited until they got back to the verdigris house to talk about what they had seen, but La Han and the others seemed eager to learn what was going on as soon as possible, so they decided to stop at a restaurant and talk there. Mao Mao picked a place on the expensive side, which left La Han less than thrilled, but she couldn't care less. A waiter showed them to their seats, and once they were seated around a round table, Mao Mao asked for whatever dishes the waiter recommended along with a bottle of their finest alcohol. Ever heard of moderation? La Han grumbled. The big earner says what? My family bought something very expensive just last year, we're practically broke. She knew that perfectly well. He'd bought it from the verdigris house. First, Mao Mao elected to explain how the white lady had changed bronze into silver and gold. It's very similar to what they call transmutation. Maybe she should have simply said liandanshu. In fact, making gunpowder fell under the same category. Transmutation was a subcategory of liandanshu, a way of turning base metals into noble ones. Mao Mao played with the spoon the waiter had brought. The art of liandanshu was aimed at prolonging people's lives, but many of the things attributed to it were pure bunk. The histories told of an ancient emperor obsessed with gaining immortality, who had instead lost his life trying misguided ways of obtaining it. Yes, the two were quite similar. But if I had to distinguish them, I would say it's closer to what they call alchemy in the West. The West? La Han asked, and Mao Mao nodded. Yet. La Han seemed to be thrown off by the fact that Mao Mao spoke more politely to Rikusen than to him. Maybe she could speak casually to Rikusen by now as well, Mao Mao reflected. My old man told me about it, but I've never seen it with my own eyes before. That piece of metal did not turn into actual silver or gold. It simply had a metal plating on it that could be scorched off in the fire to change it from one to the other. Mao Mao had wanted to try it herself, but her old man had refused to tell her the necessary ingredients. Though she suspected that even if he had, they wouldn't have been things she could get in a humble apothecary's shop. What are you saying? What's this plating? It's when you enclose one metal in a shell of another metal, Mao Mao said, pinching the spoon between the fingers of both hands. If you'd like to know more, you should ask my father. And if you'd be so kind as to tell me what you learn. No, you must tell me. Her eyes flashed. The self-burning paper could be accounted for with the byproducts of that process, and if the butterflies had been made of paper as well, that might explain them. Moreover, the audience's vision had been impaired by the mist in the theater, and they'd been drinking wine specifically made to induce a drunken stupor. Even she and La Han and the others, who hadn't been drinking, had practically been taken in. None of the other tipsy spectators would have suspected anything. Incidentally, the paper butterflies sounded a lot like a traditional trick from the island country to the east. It involved cutting shapes out of a very thin, high-quality paper. Explain how she was able to read your mind, then, La Han said, still puzzled. Yes, about that, Mao Mao was just trying to decide how to explain when the waiter returned with their pre-meal soup. Maybe this will work, Mao Mao thought, and plunged her spoon into the soup bowl. Paper, she said. Look at you, giving orders, La Han said, scowling at her, but nonetheless he produced some paper from the folds of his robe and handed it to her. Mao Mao ran the soup-laden spoon over the paper, producing a childish scrawl. She gave the paper a quick wave to dry it out, whereupon the scrawl disappeared. "Do you see it?" she asked. "The wet areas have shrunk slightly. Bit too close an observation, there. Bah! Show some respect to your adopted brother." "Absolutely not." Rikusan spoke up. "So, what does this have to do with what we saw?" "Watch." Mao Mao went over to one of the lanterns on the wall, gently removed the frame, and held the paper over the naked flame. Lahan and Rikusan looked shocked, and while that was gratifying, this shouldn't have been new to them. Jinchi and Gao Shun would have understood much sooner, Mao Mao thought. The soup-strewn parts of the page had singed and darkened in the flame. "You see?" "Hardly. What does this have to do with reading someone's mind?" Mao Mao shoved the spoon into Lahan's mouth. "How's it taste?" "Like they used seafood stock. And a little salty." "Yes. It has salt in it." "So what?" "Well, there was salt in it. Specifically, in that grainy ink she'd used. No wonder it had felt so unpleasant to write with. There was salt in the ink. Blended in well enough, and you wouldn't necessarily see it, just like you don't see it in this soup. But it was there, just like it is here." Putting it to a flame clearly revealed that there was more than just water present. "You're saying she singed the paper to reveal the number?" "How?" "No, she didn't, but there are other ways." There had been a dark writing pad under the paper Mao Mao had used. Plenty of ink would have soaked into it. Lahan looked at the slightly blackened paper, tracing the lines with his finger. "So that's what was going on?" "Yes. I believe so. It was something mixed into the ink. It didn't have to be salt, anything that could be blended with the ink but then remained behind when the ink dried would do. Suppose for the sake of argument that it was salt. Mao Mao would have written her number with the salty ink, which would have soaked through into the pad underneath. When the ink dried, the salty numeral would have appeared, a pattern of white powder on the dark writing pad. I see," Rikusan said, clapping his hands in understanding. "What about the tubes, then? How did she know which one you'd put the paper in?" "Oh, that." Mao Mao tore the paper in two, folded the halves, then put a hole through the middle. She stuck a finger through them, then blew between the two pieces of paper, producing a dull whistle. "I'm assuming you know how a flute works. You blow into it, and it makes a sound. And how do you change that sound? You change how many holes the air comes out of. Even I know that much." Didn't he get it yet, then? No, maybe not, he hadn't seen the tubes where she'd hidden the paper up close. Suppose the tubes acted like the holes of a flute. "I'm sorry, but I didn't hear them make any noise." The theater had been full of sounds of bells and gongs. But there had been another, hidden by those louder noises. "I got a pretty bad headache standing there. I suspect there was a sound so high-pitched that it couldn't be heard," Mao Mao said. Loud noises could hurt the ears. She suspected that even if she didn't consciously detect a sound, it might have subconsciously bothered her. "A high-pitched noise?" "Yes," Mao Mao said, and then blew into her flute. "Did you hear that?" "Of course I did. How about this, then?" She made the noise higher, whistling the same way she had back in the cave with Jinchi. Lahan made a face, and Rikusan looked puzzled for a second. The bodyguard, however, narrowed his eyes. "I heard that too," Lahan said. "I sort of heard it," Rikusan reported. Then the guard, sounding unsure whether he was allowed to join in the conversation, said, "I didn't hear anything." Mao Mao felt a bit bad for him, he was obviously embarrassed. "Good," she said. "You're not supposed to. It gets harder to hear as you get older." The guard was somewhere in his mid-30s. He was clearly shocked to realize he couldn't hear the sound. His reaction made him look somewhat like Gao Shun. Maybe all middle-aged people acted that way. Not everyone can hear sounds to the same pitch, Mao Mao informed them. There were variations even among people of the same age bracket. The same way some people had better eyesight than others, some had better hearing. What's more, Mao Mao suspected, although she had no way of proving this, that sometimes people with bad eyes compensated by developing better ears. I think that mystic has extremely sensitive hearing, she said. Like how the lady had reacted to Mao Mao's whistle from a substantial distance and despite all the intervening noise. Mao Mao suspected that the white lady practiced discerning whistling sounds on a regular basis. It made her think of the hunting dog Li Haku had been clowning around with on their excursion. It would also explain why there had been no flutes in the musical ensemble at the white lady's performance. Both the vertical and horizontal flutes produced changes in sound by opening and closing a series of holes along the length of the instrument. Suppose the 100 tubes in that box were akin to the holes of a flute. Mao Mao pushing the paper into one of them would be like closing a hole on an instrument. You're suggesting that she could discern 100 different sounds, and that was how she knew which pipe it was? If that box was like a flute, what served as blowing into it? There's a very simple method. What if, with the gongs and bells as signals, someone blew into the flute 10 times? The box had been covered with a veil, so it would have been no problem for the lady's assistant to be nearby, operating something that would force air through the pipes. You wouldn't even have to learn 100 different sounds, 10 would suffice. As for how they blew into the pipes, the mist explains it. The mist was steam, which meant they were boiling water somewhere to produce it. What if the desk had been designed so that the vapor would enter it from below? The audience was so focused on what was on top of the desk that they wouldn't notice any little devices underneath. Makes sense now? Lahan and the others nodded. There's one last thing, Mao Mao said, thinking of the silver liquid the lady had consumed at the end of the show. That stuff is a very potent poison. I don't know if she actually drank it or not, but it's definitely not something to try at home. You should warn other high officials about it when you get the chance. She gave Lahan her most serious possible look. Several days later, the white lady and her show vanished without a trace. In their wake they left only a series of mysterious food poisonings among the merchants of the capital. What had her objective been? The female immortal who looked like the white snake was gone, but the mystery remained. Long, long ago, those in power had sought an elixir of immortality, and had consumed silver that looked like water, believing it would prolong their lives. Little did they know all it would do was shorten them. Because of the way it moved, the metal became known as quicksilver. Mao Mao wondered what had happened to the white lady after she had drunk the stuff. Had she simply been pretending, or had she really consumed it? If the quicksilver could be expelled from the body still in its liquid state, it wouldn't be too poisonous. But if it was dissolved in steam and inhaled, or else joined with some other substance into a new form, then it was very toxic indeed. Once upon a time, it had been considered a palliative. The difference between a medicine and a poison was often a matter of application, Mao Mao reflected, gazing at the vibrant scarlet of a chunk of cinnabar and resolved to put the entire matter out of her mind. Chapter 8, Proficiencies. I'll excuse myself, then. Mao Mao didn't say a word as the man who'd delivered the letter to the apothecary shop exited, his job finished. She read the letter, remaining expressionless the entire time, then put it in a letter box. It was from Jinchi, but it wasn't quite the usual business. Mao Mao crossed her arms and cocked her head, thinking. What to do, what to do? Business from Jinchi always meant trouble, but this one seemed more trouble than most. She could hardly refuse, however, which meant the question was how best to prepare. How am I going to explain this one to Grams? Her ruminations were interrupted by the jabbering of a couple of noisy kids, Joyu and Zulin, who were carrying baskets full of fresh herbs. Oh yeah. They said something about wanting to eat kusamachi. She watched them idly for a moment, but when she saw them heading for the kitchen, she hurried to grab them by the collar. What are you doing? Joyu demanded. Let me see those, she said, rifling through his basket and inspecting the plants within. How could he get this so wrong? Mao Mao glowered at the assembled herbs. How could you screw up enough to find wolfsbane around here? She stared at Zhou Yu, who sat down sullenly. Beside him, Zulin, the younger of the two poor girls who had recently joined them, looked on with worry. She seemed to have embraced her role as Zhou Yu's henchman. I mean, they look really similar. Make your mochi with this, and you'll die. They must have gone out looking for fresh mugwort for their snack, but they'd managed to find a similar-looking but poisonous plant. Except I didn't think there was any wolfsbane around here. How had the kids found it when even Mao Mao didn't know about it? The question wouldn't leave her alone. Boo. So we can't make kusamachi. Zhou Yu and Zulin looked at each other, dejected. That's right. Give it up. I know you picked some mugwort the other day, Freckles. You should share with us. That was for Moxibustion. Zhou Yu pouted indignantly at her, and Zulin followed suit. Mao Mao mercilessly jabbed a finger in each of their mouths and pulled at their lips. Yo! That hurt. You suck. Zulin, though silent, likewise resisted. How do I suck? What was your plan, to give the entire Verdigris house food poisoning? I thought I told you not to go wandering around outside by yourself, anyway. We weren't by ourselves. Seizen was with us. That made Mao Mao frown even harder, and that was exactly when Seizen showed up, ambling in with a cloth bag in hand. Don't go running off without me, kids. I'm not a young man anymore, he said, a most inauspicious thing to utter at this particular moment. He knew about Zhou Yu's past, and even though Mao Mao kept trying to get him to stop acting like it, he insisted on treating the boy like a young princeling. Seizen. It's your fault Freckles got angry at me. Try to keep up. Without a word, Mao Mao brought her knuckle crashing down on Zhou Yu's head. Zulin looked a little panicked, and Seizen's mouth opened like he wanted to say something, but Mao Mao only glared at them both. Then she went and got the mugwort she'd picked for the shop the day before. It was a little dry by now, but it was still recognizable. She held it in one hand and Zhou Yu's wolfsbane in the other, and stuck them under Seizen's nose. It wouldn't do any good trying to tell the kids about this, but she could at least teach the closest thing to an adult in the room how to tell the difference. Do you know what these are? She asked. Sure. Mugwort and wolfsbane, obviously, Seizen said easily. Mao Mao looked at him, her mouth open. I thought I'd surreptitiously switch the wolfsbane for some mugwort, but I never got the chance. Why are kids always in such a hurry? He opened his pouch to reveal some freshly picked mugwort. He also produced another, smaller pouch from inside and handed it to Mao Mao. She looked at it with curiosity, then opened it to discover some kind of root. Is this wolfsbane root? I assume someone brought it down from the mountains and planted it here because they thought it was pretty, but that stuff is dangerous, so I pulled it up. But it would be a shame to let the root go to waste. You can use it for something, right? Yes, wolfsbane did have medicinal properties. Expressionless, Mao Mao grabbed Seizen by the hand. Still without a word, she veritably dragged him into the shop and started lining up herbs and medicines from her shelf. Then she said, "What's this?" Huh? Medlar leaves, right. And their effect? They can stop coughs and diarrhea, among other things. Mao Mao pointed to the next herb and repeated the questions. Seizen looked perplexed, but he answered. Zhou Yu and Zulin watched them from the doorway. When Mao Mao had finished interrogating Seizen, she crossed her arms and thought. So you already know about half the ingredients in here off the top of your head. What I don't know is what brought this on. Mao Mao didn't respond directly. Instead, she took a book off the shelf and handed it to him. Come to think of it, she reflected, didn't he say that once he got his feet back under him, he meant to go buy back the encyclopedias? Can you read? She asked him. The old man taught me, he said. The old man, presumably meaning the former physician, the one who would never regain his right mind. If Seisen had also learned about all those medicines from the old man, it would all make sense. This was the best kind of surprise. All right, then learn this book. And you'll be spending your afternoons here for a while. Mao Mao smacked the book she'd given Seisen. I'm sorry. I'll explain everything to the Madam and Yukio. Seisen still looked confused, but Mao Mao was feeling magnanimous enough to explain it to him. You're not exactly the most gifted bouncer in the world, are you? Well. Ahem. I think being an apothecary would fit you much better, don't you? Well, Mao Mao had no intention of retiring, but it had always been her and her father running the place. It wouldn't hurt if there were another pharmacist or two around here. She'd thought she might be able to lard the physically impaired Joyu with medical knowledge, but the little shit was only interested in playing around and drawing his pictures. No, it would be much faster to work with Seisen here. Not least because as long as Jinchi was in her life, Mao Mao was likely to be called away from the shop routinely and on short notice. It would be best if there was someone to hold down the fort. Only question is, did Seisen want to be an apothecary? At the moment, he was looking down at the book intently. He flipped a page, his expression serious. At length he said, I'm only a simple farmer. I went to that fortress because I was completely broke, and I only know how to read it all because the old guy taught me. And medicine? The best I can do is pick whatever I'm told to pick. Being an apothecary carried a certain amount of prestige. Seisen seemed to be having a crisis of confidence. Too much rejection for too long had started to take a toll on him personally. In Mao Mao's eyes, this was a problem. She'd finally found someone with some knowledge, and she was going to put them to use. So she said, what about it? Some people in this world make their living by reciting nonsensical spells. Or they dance some ridiculous dance in an attempt to cure a cold, when it would be a lot better to keep the patient warm and administer cough medicine and antipyretics. You can make those at least, right? Well, yes. But what if somebody really sick comes to me? If there's nothing you can do, then say so. Those who are going to die will die, whether they take any medicine or not. And if you think the prognosis is too grim, send them somewhere else. You already know more about medicine than some doctors out there. Like the quack. To be fair, the physician at the rear palace seemed to have a certain amount of knowledge. As a medical official, he just lacked the ability to apply it. He was very personable, but that wasn't enough. Anyway, it's settled, Mao Mao said. What's settled? Aren't you moving a little fast? We have to move fast or we'll run out of time. Mao Mao, thinking of the letter she'd received that morning, ignored the still thunderstruck Seisen, instead turning to the kids. You two, if you've got time to play around, you've got time to sweep the entrance to the shop. And be sure to learn what's in those books, and learn it well. This last was directed at Seisen. No sooner had she chased the kids out of the shop than she dropped a pile of books in front of him. As Mao Mao had suspected, Seisen turned out to be a fast learner. He picked up simple recipes quickly, and he proved capable of reading the encyclopedia, if slowly and hesitantly. Mao Mao showed him around the fields near the house as well as those outside the walls, pointing out which medicinal herbs grew where. Maybe I should teach him which plants are poisonous too. She wasn't worried mostly that it would provoke any strange impulses in him, but she still wasn't going to give him every little detail. If he was that interested, he would pick them up in the course of his study anyway. For now, she restricted herself to the most common ingredients and how to handle them. Seisen frowned when she taught him to produce an abortifacient, but he was sensible enough to understand that it was better than the more physical methods of inducing an abortion, like dunking the woman in cold water or simply beating her, both of which occasionally happened to courtesans. She'd told Joyu all the same things, but the brat had shown no interest in any of it. It seemed like every time she looked up, he'd run off to play somewhere. His little side business seemed to be filling his pockets, too, to the extent that he was even doing portraits for courtesans from other nearby brothels. One day, Mao Mao instructed Seizan to mix up a simple recipe, while she went out to deliver some medicine requested by a courtesan from one of those other establishments. No sooner had she gone outside, though, than she heard a jingling bell. She looked up, wondering what it could be, to find something charging at her. It appeared to be a calico cat running pell-mell. She might well wonder what the cat was doing there. Calicos were hardly unusual, but this one had a noticeably fine collar, woven of silk and decorated with an imported bell. Not the sort of thing you would see on every feline running around the neighborhood. "Mao Mao! Where are you?" called a familiar voice. She soon saw a portly middle-aged man approaching at something between a walk and run. It was the quack doctor. Mao Mao picked up the cat, who'd grown substantially in the time since they'd seen each other last, and held her out to the doctor as he finally shuffled up. "Young lady, it's been quite a while," he said, smiling even as he struggled to catch his breath. "Yes, sir, it has. But what in the world is going on? The cat and the quack should both have been at the rear palace, not here in the pleasure district." "Yes, about that," the quack couldn't seem to catch his breath, so Mao Mao led him back to the apothecary shop and made him some tea. She thoughtfully served it cold, and he drank it down in one gulp. "If I may ask, what are you doing here?" On second thought, never mind." Mao Mao felt bad for him. They must have finally let him go. He was a perfectly decent person, but one could only sit around collecting a salary for so long before questions started to be asked about whether one was doing anything to justify it. It would be tough for him to find new employment as a eunuch, but Mao Mao resolved to be as cordial to him as possible. The quack, however, looked at her skeptically and said, "I think you're under some kind of misunderstanding, miss. Please, you needn't feel embarrassed about it with me. It happens to everyone at some point." "No, I'm not certain it does," the quack stroked his none too rich mustache, while Mao Mao, the cat, yawned on his knees. Apparently he'd continued to serve as her caretaker. Once consort Gyakuyo had become the emperor's bride, she had moved to a palace adjoining that of the Empress Dowager, where many a rule and regulation had to be observed, much to the chagrin of the sovereign's little girl, Princess Lingli. It couldn't possibly have hurt to allow her a single pet, could it? I suppose if it were just the Empress Dowager, she would be fine with it, Mao Mao thought. But the other palace women living nearby would never have put up with it. And Gyakuyo no doubt had more ladies-in-waiting by now too. Even in the rear palace, she'd barely gotten by with her 7 women. Mao Mao felt a pang of loneliness, but she knew it was the right thing that she hadn't followed Empress Gyakuyo. Mao Mao was confident that she could cause more of an uproar than even her feline counterpart, if she might say so herself. "Ahem, so, the matter at hand," the quack said, having finally gotten his breathing under control. He drank some more tea. "I've been granted permission to return home for the first time in quite a long while, and I was just on my way there." "Huh? Finally sending you back, are they? Now you're just teasing me, young lady," the quack said with a touch of exasperation. He was right, and since it was preventing the conversation from progressing, Mao Mao decided to leave it at that. "So instead of your home, you're here. Why is that?" she asked. "Yes, well," he looked at her with an inscrutable expression. "The permission was granted on a rather unusual condition." "You haven't heard anything about it, miss." "Exactly what kind of condition?" "Nothing major. But apparently there's someone who wants to travel with me part of the way. This is a personal request from the matron of the serving women, so I'm sure it's no one strange. This apothecary shop, it transpired, was to be the meeting place." Mao Mao thought back to the letter she'd received several days before, a unilateral demand from Jinshi that she accompany him on an expedition he would be undertaking. No duration was specified, nor any destination, nor even when they would leave. Mao Mao was reluctant to close the shop every time they went on one of these little adventures, and she knew the madam wouldn't look favorably on it either, which was why she'd been in such a hurry to teach Seizen the ropes. I thought maybe I'd have a little longer. Thankfully, Seizen was a quick student, and she'd readied a supply of medicine beforehand. She was left to wonder, though, why they would be traveling with the quack doctor. She would ask later. And as for why Mao Mao is here, I thought maybe I could ask my family to look after her, the quack said. Considering that he himself was evidently the only alternative, it seemed like a wise choice. He would be lonely, yes, but the kitten had originally stayed at the palace only because of Princess Lingli's caprice. It would probably be hard to justify keeping her in the medical office much longer. They'll be happy to have her catching rats for them. I see, Mao Mao said. The quack seemed jubilant at the idea of seeing his family again for the first time in more than a decade. Mao Mao recalled that they were producers of paper, supplying even the imperial court. They certainly would welcome a guard to be on the lookout for any rats that might try to chew on the product. It sounded far away, though, and Mao Mao, the girl, couldn't help wondering whether Mao Mao, the cat, would behave herself on the long journey. Oh, look! A cat, called the courtesans. It was only afternoon, and they still had time before the customers started to arrive. The cat, unfortunately, was startled by the shouting. She gave the quack's knees a good scratch, then fled the shop. Ow! No, Mao Mao, wait! What a name, one of the courtesans said, laughing as she watched the cat go. The animal with the unfortunate moniker ducked through a crack in the door of the shop and made for the entrance to the verdigris house. Mao Mao and the quack slipped on their shoes as quickly as possible and went after her. Mao Mao, the cat, went weaving among women fresh from early baths, and looking less than made up, ducked between the legs of the men servants preparing the bedchambers, and arrived at the kitchen. She could see 4 short legs, the kids having a late lunch. Where'd you come from? Zhou Yu asked as the cat came to a halt in front of him. He chewed on his chopsticks and looked at the calico. Zulin blinked her dewy eyes. Mao Mao, the cat, splayed herself over Zhou Yu's foot. Is this what you're after? Zhou Yu asked, picking up some fish with his chopsticks. It was just grilled blueback, but it had a pleasantly salty taste without the need for any seasoning. Mro. Mao Mao batted down Zhou Yu's food. Hey! Hey, you! The fish fell smack on the dirt floor and Mao Mao gobbled it up. Awfully indelicate table manners for one consuming such a fine feast, rather like a certain someone else. No, Mao Mao, don't do that, the quack cried as he arrived, breathing hard. Stupid cat! And who's the geezer? But that wasn't Zhou Yu's only question. Wait! Mao Mao? Seriously? He grinned openly at Mao Mao, the girl. Even Zulin seemed to be laughing under her breath, in her own mute way. Mao Mao, thoroughly displeased, at least managed to snatch up the calico, although there was no hope of recovering the fish, which the cat kept firmly in her jaws. Zhou Yu looked ruefully at his meal, but the cat seemed to intrigue him. When he poked her squishy pink toe pads, he exclaimed "Oh!" and his eyes sparkled. They decided to leave Mao Mao, the cat, with Zhou Yu and Zulin, with strict instructions not to let her get away. They alerted one of the men servants, so chances were the kids couldn't get up to too much trouble. When they got back to the shop, Mao Mao finally had a chance to ask the quack what was really going on. Fiddling uncomfortably with his facial hair, he said, I believe you know about my family's paper business. Yes, sir. Ahem, well, the reason I'm going home is actually because there's been a bit of an issue. Some time ago, he'd received a letter from his younger sister saying that the quality of the paper had suddenly gotten worse. That problem was supposed to have been solved, but maybe something new had come up. That's why I asked to be allowed to visit, but apparently someone important had just been hoping they could see my village themselves. Jinchi had been interested in paper production since his days as a eunuch, so maybe this struck him as the perfect opportunity to see the process up close. But that still left Mao Mao wondering what the problem was this time. What did her letter say? She asked. I'm not quite sure I can tell you here, the quack said, looking distinctly uncomfortable. Please, let me explain after we get there. Very well, Mau Mau said, and as if on cue, a horse could be heard neighing outside. It was a somber young man who appeared, his face classically lovely, but his bangs worn long to hide a burn scar on his right cheek. Mau Mau recognized the gloomy visitor. Not bad, not bad. It was the customer who'd come to the Verdigris house when all the courtesans had been summoned to entertain. He'd paid no attention to them, just sat there drinking wine. He was one of Jinchi's alter egos. Jinchi had used the fake burn to hide the real scar on his cheek, and his whole appearance was so much less, well, sparkly than it normally was that he looked like a different person. Mau Mau had taught him once how to disguise himself. It seemed he'd put the lesson to good use. If she hadn't seen him in his darker moments as well as a few disguises, she wouldn't have realized it was him. As for the quack doctor, he didn't seem particularly wary even when confronted with the lovely noble. He didn't recognize him at all. Are you ready to go? Basin spoke in lieu of the disguised Jinchi. His clothing was finer than Jinchi's, and Jinchi behaved like a servant toward him. It seemed to make Basin slightly uncomfortable, although he was likely even more worried about the possibility of being noticed by Mau Mau's sister Pyrin before they could get out of there. Am I ready? I dare say it's a little sudden for that, Mau Mau said. Yes, the letter had arrived several days ago, but there'd been no specific indication of their departure date. Frankly, she hadn't gotten anything ready at all. I'm afraid it was out of our control. There were issues of timing to consider. We've already packed for you. True, Jinchi's appearance suggested they were going to go spying, and going spying suggested they were going to be at it for a while, so Mau Mau understood that they must have pushed themselves to be ready for this moment. But to say they'd prepared changes of clothes for a woman, did they understand what that meant? Whatever. Regardless of what their relationship might actually be, brothers or whatever, the Emperor certainly saw fit to work Jinchi like a dog. There were probably still things to clean up at the rear palace, along with plenty of other professional headaches Jinchi no doubt had to deal with. It was his job, so he couldn't exactly complain, but still. It's like he's grooming a successor, Mau Mau thought, and then promptly threw the idea away. At the moment it was Consort Gyakuyo's no, Empress Gyakuyo's son who was the presumptive heir. And what's more, Consort Lihua had also borne a son. The emperor was only in his mid-30s, and still the picture of health. In all likelihood, he would easily remain on the throne until his children came of age. Assuming, of course, that nothing happened to him, but Mau Mau elected not to contemplate such an unhappy possibility.